Between 1851 and 1901 in Victorian England, over 2.5 million women were classified as spinsters, facing societal scorn, limited opportunities, and a desperate struggle for independence. With 500,000 more women than men in Britain, many had no chance of marriage, forcing them to navigate a world designed to exclude them. Here's what life was really like for a Victorian spinster. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, let's head back to Victorian England. Trust me, it's going to be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously. Adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. The room is cold, not like, oh, I should put on a sweater cold. I mean the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and sets up camp there. Your eyes flutter open to darkness, save for the faint grey light filtering through thin curtains. It's 5 a.m. on a January morning in London, 1862, and the boarding house room you call home feels like an icebox. You're 25 years old, and according to society, you're officially a spinster. How fun. Miss Harrington, are you awake? The sharp voice of Mrs. Wilson, your landlady, pierces through the door. The fire needs lighting downstairs. We have guests arriving at 8. There's no such thing as hitting snooze when you're a spinster living in someone else's home. The floorboards sting your bare feet like tiny knives as you slide them from beneath the thin blanket. Unlike your warm bed right now, Victorian bedding was, let's just say, minimal if you weren't wealthy. Coming, Mrs. Wilson, you call back, your voice still thick with sleep. So here's the thing about being a spinster in Victorian England. It wasn't just about being unmarried. It was a whole identity that society dumped on you, and it happened way earlier than you might think. You might be picturing some grey-haired lady with cats, right? Nope. By age 25, sometimes even younger, unmarried women were already being labelled as spinsters, just sitting there at a family dinner while relatives discuss your marriage prospects like you're not even there. What's wrong with Elizabeth? Why hasn't she secured a husband yet? Thanks, Aunt Margaret. I'm literally right here. The mirror on your dresser, cracked in one corner, reflects a young woman who looks nothing like the desperate, withered creature society imagines when they hear spinster. But that doesn't matter. Once you hit your mid-20s without a wedding ring, the transformation was complete in everyone else's eyes. You reach for your dress, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before. When you're working as a live-in assistant at a boarding house, you don't exactly have an extensive wardrobe, just 3 serviceable dresses that you wash by hand every Sunday. Your hair gets twisted up into a tight bun, no fashionable curls or elaborate styles for working women. Practicality rules everything about your appearance now. Miss Harrington. The voice is more insistent this time. For one moment, you call back, pinning the last strand of hair in place. Okay, so why were there so many spinsters in Victorian England? Well, for one thing, math was not on women's side. The 1851 census showed there were about 500,000 more women than men in Britain, and 2.5 million unmarried women total. That's not a small number. Men were dying in wars, workplace accidents, and diseases at higher rates, plus a bunch of guys were shipping off to the colonies looking for fortune, so it wasn't like all these women were unmarriageable monsters. There simply weren't enough men to go around. Think about it. If musical chairs had 500,000 more players than chairs, you wouldn't blame the people left standing, would you? You hurry down the narrow servants' staircase, the wooden steps creaking beneath your feet. The boarding house is still mostly silent, its occupants enjoying their final hours of sleep. But for you, the day begins in darkness and ends long after the sun has set. I spent way too long researching Victorian boarding houses for this, by the way, like concerningly long. These weren't the friendly, quirky places you see in movies. They were often dreary, crowded, and offered little privacy. Lower-end ones were downright dangerous, while the slightly better ones, like where you're staying, were just soul-crushingly bland. The kitchen is at least warmer than your room, thanks to the banked coals in the stove from the night before. You get to work immediately, stoking the fire and adding coal. Your hands are already chapped and red from constant exposure to water, soap, and the biting cold. Your stomach growls, reminding you that yesterday's dinner was meagre at best, a thin soup and a chunk of bread. But breakfast won't happen until after the morning chores are done. Mrs. Wilson is strict about the schedule. "There you are," Mrs. Wilson says, appearing in the doorway like a disapproving ghost. "The dining room needs sweeping, and the front parlour fire should be lit next. Mr. and Mrs. Pemberton will be expecting tea when they come down at 7. She's not cruel, exactly, just businesslike. When you're employing a spinster to help run your boarding house, there's no need for warmth or familiarity. It's a transaction. You work, you get a room and meals." "Yes, Mrs. Wilson," you say, keeping your eyes down. "See, the whole unmarried woman living alone thing? Not really an option in Victorian times. Respectable spinsters couldn't just rent an apartment and live their best single lives. Society literally wouldn't allow it. Spinsters typically either lived with family, if they were lucky enough to have family who would take them in, or found positions as governesses, companions, or, like you, assistants in businesses like boarding houses. The alternative was, well, the workhouse, and nobody wanted to end up in the workhouse. Victorian workhouses were basically prisons for the poor, where you'd do brutal labour for barely enough food to survive. Your second cousin ended up in one after her parents died, and the last letter you received from her described conditions that still give you nightmares. So, here you are, 25, unmarried, working for room and board in a boarding house that caters to travellers and long-term residents of modest means. Your room is tiny, your possessions few, but you're not in the workhouse. That counts for something. As you sweep the dining room, your mind wanders to how you ended up here. Your father was a clerk in a small firm, providing a respectable but modest living for your family. When he died of pneumonia 6 years ago, everything changed. Your mother took in sewing, but it wasn't enough. Your brother James was apprenticed to a printer, and well, you had expected to be married by then. That was the plan every girl was supposed to have. But the suitable young men in your social circle were few, and none had shown particular interest before your father died. After his death, when your family's circumstances declined, your prospects dried up completely. There's this wild misconception that Victorian women never worked before they had to, but that's just not true. Even in the mid-1800s, about 30 to 40% of women contributed significantly to their household income. It's just that the census takers often didn't record it properly. They'd list a woman's marital status, single, married or widowed, but not always her employment. And smaller jobs like helping with a family business or part-time work weren't considered important enough to document. But by the 1850s, more women than ever were working outside the home. In fact, female employment was higher then than any other time until after World War II. That's a history fact that gets weirdly overlooked. You finish sweeping and move to the parlour to prepare the fire. Your knees ache from the previous day's scrubbing, but you ignore the pain. Pain is a luxury you can't afford to acknowledge when there's work to be done. The Pembertons are regular guests, travelling salespeople who stay at the boarding house every other month. Mrs. Pemberton always looks at you with a mixture of pity and smugness, the look of a married woman regarding a spinster. Such a shame, you once overheard her tell her husband. Not unattractive, but so plane. No wonder she never caught a husband. You hadn't known whether to laugh or cry, as if catching a husband was like trapping a rabbit, a matter of skill rather than circumstance, as if your father's death and your family's subsequent financial struggles hadn't made you practically invisible to eligible men. The fire catches, and you feed it carefully, adding coal bit by bit. Heat begins to radiate outward, warming your frozen fingers. You allow yourself 30 seconds of this luxury before standing to set out the tea things. Now, here's something interesting. Around the mid-19th century, there was a big shift in how people thought about marriage. It used to be primarily a business transaction, a way to share wealth and connections between families, but by the early 1800s, there was more emphasis on marrying for love. This actually made things harder in some ways. Women were still taught that marriage was their ultimate goal, but now it had to be a love match. And when you combine that with women's lack of legal rights, like they couldn't own property or vote, suddenly the pressure wasn't just to find a man, but to find the perfect man. You needed someone you loved, who could support you financially, and who would respect your autonomy within the marriage. That's a pretty tall order, especially when the pickings were slim to begin with. So many women just decided they'd rather not marry at all than end up with the wrong person. In an 1889 magazine called Titbits, I swear that's the real name, women wrote in explaining why they chose to be spinsters, and their answers were amazing. One woman wrote that if she got married, she'd have to be a wife, mother, nurse, housekeeper, chambermaid, seamstress, dairymaid, and scrub generally. As just a dairymaid, she only had one job to do. Another said marriage was like an electric battery. When you once join hands, you can't let go, however much it hurts. And my personal favourite, from a Miss Sparrow who said she didn't want to enlarge my menagerie of pets because she found the animal man less docile than a dog, less affectionate than a cat, and less amusing than a monkey. Damn, Miss Sparrow, tell us how you really feel. By 7 o'clock, the house is stirring to life. The Pembertons come down to the parlour and you serve them tea with hands that don't tremble, despite your exhaustion. Your stomach is still empty, but you've grown accustomed to hunger as a constant companion. "Thank you, girl," Mr. Pemberton says without looking at you. You're 25, hardly a girl, but invisible people don't get to correct their betters. "Will there be anything else, sir?" you ask, your voice the perfect blend of civility and efficiency. "No, that will be all for now." You return to the kitchen where Mrs. Wilson allows you a cup of tea and a slice of bread with a scraping of butter. It's not much, but it's something. The other girl who works here, Annie, a maid of 16, joins you briefly. "Morning, Miss Harrington," she says with a cheerfulness that feels foreign to you now. "Cold one today, innit?" "Indeed," you reply, sipping your tea to warm your insides. "Have you done the upstairs rooms yet?" "Just about to start. Mrs. Thompson in room 4 wants her fire lit first thing, says her rheumatism is acting up something fierce." You nod. Mrs. Thompson is a widow who's lived at the boarding house for 3 years. Her small widow's pension allows her this modest accommodation, but little else. In some ways, her position is even more precarious than yours. At least you're young enough to work. She's at the mercy of her late husband's pension administrator. Now, I should point out that this whole choosing to be a spinster thing was mainly a white middle-class luxury. Working-class women and women of colour rarely had the option to just decide not to marry if they didn't want to. If their families couldn't support them, they were pretty much out of luck. But with the shortage of men, spinsters were becoming more common across all social classes, and society was freaking out about what to do with all these single ladies. In 1869, an English essayist named William Rathbone Gregg published a work titled "Why Are Women Redundant?" Yes, redundant, like extra office furniture. It was a 40-page essay about his concerns over all these superfluous women cluttering up society, and his solution: ship them all off to the British colonies to become wives for the lonely settlers there. That way, he figured, the population would be more evenly balanced in both places. Small problem though, how exactly do you transport hundreds of thousands of women across the Atlantic? Also, a lot of these spinsters were from middle or upper class families. You can't just force them onto a boat. After your brief breakfast, it's back to work. The morning is a blur of cleaning, serving and catering to the needs of the boarders. By noon, your back aches and your feet throb, but there's no time to rest. The other boarders begin to emerge from their rooms: a retired schoolmaster, a clerk, two elderly sisters who share a room to save on costs, and a young man studying law. They barely notice you as you clear dishes, refill teapots, and stoke fires. This is your life now. Invisible, essential but unseen, the perfect Victorian spinster, useful but unobtrusive, present but not acknowledged. But as you work, your mind is far from dormant. You've been saving. 3 shillings tucked away in a small cloth bag hidden beneath a loose floorboard in your room. It's not much, but it's something that belongs solely to you. Because here's what society didn't quite understand yet. Being a spinster wasn't always a failure or a tragedy. Sometimes it was a choice. Sometimes it was an opportunity. The woman question, that's what they called it in Victorian times. It wasn't one specific question, but rather a term used for any issue related to women's education, healthcare, voting rights, and proper gender roles. And with all these spinsters popping up, it became more relevant than ever. By the mid-19th century, early feminist groups were using the spinster problem to push for solutions that benefited all women. Their main goal: better education, especially for middle-class women who didn't have family wealth to fall back on and weren't able to work in domestic service due to social restrictions. By the 1870s, several colleges for women had opened in England, like Newman College and Somerville College. Some legacy institutions even started allowing small numbers of women to study there, though they were barred from taking final examinations, which meant they did all the same work as their male classmates but didn't get a degree at the end, because of course. Still, the push for women's education was largely successful, and by the late 1800s, single women suddenly had more options than ever before. As evening approaches, you find a rare moment of solitude in the small back garden where the laundry is hung to dry. The winter air is sharp in your lungs, but the break from the stuffiness of the house is welcome. You pull a small, worn book from your pocket, a cheap edition of poems you purchased with a few precious pennies saved over months. Reading is your escape, your window into worlds beyond the boarding house walls. Miss Harrington, Mrs. Wilson's voice cuts through your momentary peace. Dinner needs serving. You tuck the book away hastily. Coming, Mrs. Wilson. As you hurry back inside, you pass a mirror in the hallway and catch a glimpse of yourself, back straight, face composed, eyes forward. Not the desperate, pitiful creature the word spinster conjures, but a woman standing on her own 2 feet in a world that never expected her to. And in that moment, in spite of everything, you feel something like pride. Look, Victorian England wasn't exactly a paradise for women, but it wasn't as simple as the stories make it seem either. By the late 1800s, women were pushing boundaries, creating opportunities, and redefining what it meant to be female in a society that tried to keep them in very narrow boxes. And spinsters, they were at the forefront of this quiet revolution, women who, by choice or by circumstance, lived lives that didn't revolve around husbands and children, women who found other paths, other purposes, other ways to make their mark. Tonight, as you sink into your bed, exhausted from another long day, you think about the 3 shillings hidden beneath the floorboard and the advertisement you saw in the newspaper last week for a new millinery shop opening on the other side of the city. They're looking for apprentices, women to learn the trade of hat making. It doesn't pay much at first, but a skilled milliner can eventually earn a decent living, enough perhaps for a small room of one's own. It's a risk, a terrifying leap into the unknown, but as you drift towards sleep, you find yourself calculating how many more shillings you need before you can afford to take that chance, to step out of invisibility and into a life of your own making. Because that's what being a spinster in Victorian England could mean. Not just the absence of a husband, but the presence of possibility, a different kind of life than the one society prescribed. Difficult, yes, lonely sometimes, but also, in its way, free. Unlike your warm, comfortable bed tonight, sleep for a Victorian spinster was often just another form of work, gathering strength for the battles of tomorrow. And there would always be battles, but also, increasingly, victories. As you slip into dreams, you don't know it yet, but you're part of something bigger than yourself, a quiet revolution of women who, for countless different reasons, found themselves outside the traditional path and decided to forge new ones instead. Your story is just beginning, and in the darkness of Victorian London, that's both a terrifying and an exhilarating thought. You wake to a sliver of grey light cutting through your curtains. Another day at the boarding house, another day of Mrs. Wilson's sharp commands, another day of invisibility, but something's different this morning. The advertisement you tore from the newspaper is still clutched in your hand, creased from being folded and unfolded dozens of times. Apprentices wanted, Madame Beaumont's millinery, previous experience not required, inquire within. The pay would be meagre at first. Apprentices earn almost nothing, but a skilled milliner could eventually make enough to rent a room of her own, to be independent. 3 shillings saved, 7 more needed for the first month's rent on the cheapest room you could find, then food, then fabric for a new dress that doesn't scream boarding house assistant. Your fingers trace the words on the paper. Is this madness? Respectable women don't just leave, not without family to go to, not without a husband waiting. Miss Harrington, Mrs. Wilson's voice shatters your thoughts. The breakfast needs preparing. You tuck the advertisement into your pocket and swing your legs over the side of the bed. Dreams are for night time. The day belongs to duty. So here's a fun thing about Victorian working women that nobody talks about. They actually had access to more jobs than people realise. Not great jobs, mind you. We're not talking CEO positions. But by the 1850s, the number of women in the workforce had seriously expanded. Textiles was a big industry for women, with jobs in everything from spinning yarn to making hats. Factory work was plentiful but brutal. Dangerous conditions, terrible pay, and the kind of hours that'd make an Amazon warehouse manager blush. But sewing-related trades? Those were considered respectable positions for women, and millinery, hat-making, was especially desirable. Not only did it provide steady work, but it also offered something precious, independence. Some milliners even ran their own shops eventually. The breakfast routine passes in a blur of boiling water, toast, eggs, and endless cups of tea. The boarders barely acknowledge you as they eat, their conversation flowing around you as if you're just another piece of furniture. Only young Mr. Patterson, the law student, offers a "Thank you, Miss Harrington," when you refill his cup. His politeness always catches you off guard. "You're welcome, sir," you murmur, eyes downcast as proper. Miss Harrington, he says, lowering his voice slightly, I wonder if you might direct me to a good bookshop nearby. My studies require some additional texts. You blink in surprise. Boarders rarely ask you for anything beyond household matters. Hatchard's on Piccadilly is excellent, sir. You play seeding, or if you prefer something less expensive, there's a second-hand book dealer on Crawford Street who has quite a good selection. He smiles. Crawford Street it is then, thank you. The interaction lasts all of 20 seconds, but it's still rattling around in your head an hour later as you scrub the dining room floor, someone treating you like a person with knowledge and thoughts rather than just a pair of hands to fetch and carry. The museum guide told me something off the record about Victorian social classes. They weren't quite as rigid in everyday interactions as we imagine. Sure, the overall structure was strict, but in the small moments, people were still just people. Sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, often somewhere in between. By midday, you've completed enough chores to earn a brief reprieve. Mrs. Wilson has gone to the market, and you seize this rare moment of freedom to slip out the back door. The millinery shop is a 20-minute walk away, in a neighbourhood slightly more fashionable than yours. Each step feels both terrifying and exhilarating. You shouldn't be here. You should be at the boarding house preparing the midday meal, but the advertisement burns in your pocket like a hot coal. Madame Beaumont's millinery sits on a corner, its window display showcasing 3 elegant hats on wooden stands. The bell above the door jingles as you enter, and your heart hammers in your chest. Okay, picture this. Victorian hat shops weren't just places to buy headgear. They were like the haute couture fashion houses of their day. Hats were everything. They could make or break a woman's entire look, and ladies with money would spend obscene amounts on them. I'm talking months' rent on a single hat. And milliners? They were like the rock stars of the fashion world. Well, maybe not rock stars, more like respected session musicians. They had real skills, real training, and could make real money. In London and Paris in 1889, over 8,000 women worked in millinery. That's a lot of hats, people. The shop's interior smells of fabric, steam, and the faint chemical tang of dyes. 3 women work at a large table in the back, their hands moving with practiced precision as they shape, stitch, and adorn various hat forms. None of them looks up as you enter. A tall woman emerges from a back room, eyeing you with a practiced gaze that takes in your worn dress and scrubbed hands in an instant. "May I help you?" she asks, her tone suggesting she doubts she can. You swallow hard. "I've come about the apprenticeship position. In the advertisement." She raises an eyebrow. "Previous experience?" "None in millinery specifically," you admit, "but I'm skilled with a needle. I did all the household sewing after my mother's eyesight began to fail." "How old are you?" Her gaze is assessing, not unkind, but certainly not warm. 25. Rather old to begin an apprenticeship. The words sting, but you don't let it show. "I'm a quick learner, madame." "Beaumont," she supplies. Though not truly a madam, Miss Beaumont will do. The French touch is simply good for business. Wait, what? You mean to tell me that the fancy madam was just marketing? Yep, plenty of Victorian businesses added a French flair to seem more sophisticated and fashionable. Paris was the centre of the fashion world, so a French connection, real or imagined, gave you credibility. It's basically the 1800s version of putting luxury or artisanal in your brand name today. She studies you for another moment, then says, "The work is hard, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. You'll begin as a basic stitcher before learning the more complex techniques. Pay is 2 shillings a week to start. After a year, if you show promise, it rises to 4. 2 shillings a week. It would take months to save enough for a room, but it's something, a beginning. When can you start? She asks. The question catches you off guard. You hadn't expected to be offered the position so quickly. You haven't given notice to Mrs. Wilson. You haven't figured out where you'll live in the meantime. I would need to make some arrangements first, you stammer. Miss Bowman's expression cools slightly. The position may not remain open. There are many women seeking respectable employment. I understand. Could I perhaps begin in 2 weeks' time? She considers this. Very well. 2 weeks. Be here at 6 in the morning, dressed neatly. Bring your own scissors and needles if you have them. Thank you, Miss Beaumont. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. She nods briskly. What is your name? Elizabeth Harrington? Well, Miss Harrington, I shall expect punctuality and diligence. We serve a discerning clientele here. As you leave the shop, your mind races. You've done it. You've secured a position, but now the real challenges begin. Where will you live on 2 shillings a week? How will you survive until your first payment? And how on earth will you tell Mrs. Wilson? On the walk back to the boarding house, you pass a group of young women about your age, dressed in the simple but neat attire of shop girls. They're laughing together, sharing some private joke. When was the last time you laughed like that? When was the last time you had friends to laugh with? Victorian working women often formed tight-knit communities. They had to. The world wasn't exactly cheering them on. Those friendships weren't just nice to have. They were survival mechanisms. You shared rooms to save on rent, nursed each other through illness, lent clothes for job interviews, warned each other about handsy bosses. Without family support, your fellow working women became your family. You slip back into the boarding house just minutes before Mrs. Wilson returns. The afternoon passes in a haze of chores and planning. By evening, you're exhausted but unable to sleep, your mind racing with possibilities and fears. The next morning, you approach Mrs. Wilson as she tallies the accounts in her small office. Mrs. Wilson, might I speak with you for a moment? She looks up, irritated at the interruption. Make it quick, Miss Harrington. The linens need changing. You take a deep breath. I've secured a position at a millinery shop. I'll be leaving in 2 weeks' time. Her pen stills. Leaving? And who, pray tell, will handle your duties here? I'm sure you'll find a suitable replacement, you say, trying to keep your voice steady. Many women are seeking positions. Millinery, she scoffs. Fancy work for fancy ladies. You think you're too good for honest labour now? Not at all, you reply, though her words sting. But I wish to learn a trade. She studies you with narrowed eyes. Very well, but don't come crawling back when you find the work too demanding or the pay too meagre, and I'll expect you to train your replacement before you go. Of course, Mrs. Wilson, thank you for understanding. Understanding is a stretch, but at least she hasn't turned you out on the spot. You have 2 weeks to find accommodations and prepare for your new life. That afternoon, as you polish the banister, young Mr. Patterson passes by on his way out. Good afternoon, Miss Harrington, he says with his usual politeness. Good afternoon, Mr. Patterson, you reply. He hesitates, then says, I found that bookshop on Crawford Street. You were right, their selection is excellent. I'm much obliged for the recommendation. A small thing, this exchange. Insignificant to him, perhaps, but to you, starved as you are for simple human acknowledgement, it feels momentous. You're welcome, sir, you say, and allow yourself the luxury of meeting his eyes as you speak. They're kind eyes, you notice, observant. I heard Mrs. Wilson mention you're leaving us, he says. A new position? You nod. At a millinery shop. Ah, hats. He smiles. My sister adores hats. Spends far too much on them, according to my father. They're not merely frivolous, you find yourself saying. A good hat is an investment. It protects from sun and rain, enhances one's appearance, and if well made, can last for years. Where did that come from? Since when do you offer opinions to the boarders? But Mr. Patterson doesn't seem offended. If anything, he appears amused. I shall inform my sister that her extravagance is actually practicality. She'll be delighted with this interpretation. You can't help but smile. Happy to be of service, sir. After he leaves, you return to your polishing, but with a lighter heart. The exchange reminds you that there's a world beyond Mrs. Wilson's critical gaze, a world where you might speak and be heard. The next 2 weeks pass in a whirlwind of preparation. You work during the day and hunt for accommodations in the evenings. Most lodgings are far beyond your means, but finally you find a possibility. A room in a house on Greystone Lane, shared with 3 other working women. The rent is steep, 1 shilling and 6pence per week, but by pooling resources for food and coal you might just manage. Victorian housing was an absolute nightmare if you weren't wealthy. No regulation, no standards. You could end up in a place with 15 people sharing 1 toilet if you were lucky enough to have indoor plumbing at all. Disease spread like wildfire. Privacy, that was a luxury most couldn't afford. But sharing with other working women, that was the hack that made independent living possible. You'd cram 4 women into a room meant for 1, split the costs, and somehow make it work. Was it comfortable? Nope. Was it better than being under someone else's thumb? For many women, absolutely. Your new housemates are all employed, 2 as shop girls and 1 as a typist in a business office. Typewriting was a relatively new field, increasingly popular for middle-class women. It paid decently, was clean, respectable work, and had a certain modern allure to it. The typewriter girl was basically the Victorian equivalent of the sexy librarian archetype. Young, single, in the city, working with cutting-edge technology. Men were both intrigued and slightly threatened by her. She represented this new breed of independent working woman who didn't necessarily need a husband to survive. During your final days at the boarding house, you train your replacement, a quiet girl of 18 named Mary, recently arrived from the countryside. She watches you with wide eyes as you demonstrate the endless tasks that fill your days. How do you remember it all? She asks, after you've explained the specific preferences of each boarder. How Mr. Henderson likes his eggs, how Mrs. Thompson needs her fire built just so, how the elderly sisters require tea at precisely 4 o'clock. You will too, with time, you assure her, and Mrs. Wilson will remind you if you forget. That's putting it mildly. Mrs. Wilson's reminders tend to be sharp enough to draw blood. On your final evening, you pack your meagre possessions, 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, a shawl, a pair of worn boots, your precious book of poems, and the 9 shillings and 3pence you've managed to save. Everything fits into a single carpet bag. Mrs. Wilson pays you your final wages, 6 shillings for the month, without ceremony or well wishes. The boarders barely notice your departure, with the exception of Mr. Patterson, who surprises you with the gift of a small book, Poems by Christina Rossetti. For your new adventure, he says simply. Every hatmaker should have poetry in her life. The book must have cost at least 2 shillings. It's an extravagant gift and utterly unexpected. I couldn't possibly, you begin. Please, he interrupts. My sister would approve. She's something of a blue stocking herself. A blue stocking, a woman with literary or intellectual interests. It's not always used as a compliment, but the way he says it, warmly and with a slight smile, suggests he views such women with approval. Thank you, you say finally, accepting the slender volume. I shall treasure it. You arrive at your new lodgings on Greystone Lane just as the spring sun is setting. The house is narrow and shabby, but cleaner than you expected. Your room on the third floor is small enough that the 4 beds nearly touch, with a single chest of drawers to be shared and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. Your roommates greet you with curiosity but kindness. Emma and Sarah, the shop girls, work at a draper's establishment nearby. Jane, the typist, has the highest wages and a certain confidence the others lack. "Welcome to our palace," Jane says with a wry smile, helping you set your bag on the one empty bed. "It's not much, but it's ours. Well, technically it's Mr. Finch's, the landlord, but he only comes round on Fridays for the rent." "Thank you," you say, still awkward with these women who are to be your new family of sorts. "I start at Madame, that is, Miss Beaumont's millinery tomorrow." "Beaumont's?" Emma's eyes widen. "That's a proper establishment. They make hats for real ladies, not just middle-class pretenders. How'd you land that position?" "I simply applied," you admit. "I had no idea it was particularly prestigious." Sarah laughs. "Everything has a hierarchy in London, haven't you noticed? Even hat shops." That night, squeezed into your narrow bed with the sounds of 3 other women breathing in the darkness, you feel a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, you begin building something that belongs solely to you. You're still a spinster, still unmarried at the advanced age of 25. Still subject to raised eyebrows and pitying glances. But something has shifted. The word doesn't seem quite so heavy anymore. Because here's what they don't tell you about Victorian spinsters. Many of them were trailblazers. They pushed into new professions, created independent lives, and quietly revolutionized what it meant to be a woman in a society that offered them limited options. Your first day at the millinery shop dawns cold but clear. You dress carefully in your best dress, the dark blue one with only a small tear in the sleeve that you've mended so carefully it's nearly invisible. You've polished your boots and arranged your hair neatly beneath your own modest hat. The city is just waking as you make your way to Madame Beaumont's. Street vendors are setting up their carts, delivery boys race past with packages, and the ever-present coal smoke hangs in the air, mingling with the smell of the river and the hundreds of thousands of humans living in close proximity. This is London in 1862, dirty, crowded, chaotic, but also vibrant and alive with possibility, and you're part of it now, not just as an invisible servant in someone else's home, but as a woman making her own way. You arrive at the shop 10 minutes early, breathless with anxiety and anticipation. Miss Beaumont nods approvingly at your punctuality, then introduces you to the other women. Mrs. Carter, the most experienced milliner who handles the most expensive custom orders. Miss Pierce, who specializes in trimmings and decorations, and Miss Walsh, the junior milliner who will be training you. "You'll start with basic stitching," Miss Beaumont explains, leading you to a workstation. "Hats require precision and consistency. Every stitch must be perfect. Perfect stitching when your hands are already chapped from years of housework, when the light in the shop is dim even with the gas lamps lit, when failure means dismissal and potential destitution, no pressure." But as you take up needle and thread, you find a surprising calm settling over you. This, at least, you know how to do. Your mother taught you to sew when you were barely 6 years old, and your hands remember even if your conscious mind is racing with anxiety. The hours pass in concentrated work. By midday, your back aches from hunching over the fine stitches, but Miss Walsh nods with grudging approval at your work. "Not bad," she says, examining your stitches. "You've sewn before, clearly." My mother was a seamstress before her eyes began to fail, you explain. She taught me. Well, it shows. Keep this up and you might move to basic shaping by month's end. It's not effusive praise, but in this environment, it's significant. You allow yourself a small glow of pride as you break for a quick midday meal. Bread and cheese you've brought from home, eaten quickly in the back room. The afternoon brings more stitching, but also your first glimpse of the true art of millinery as you watch Mrs. Carter create a hat from start to finish for an important client. Her hands move with such surety, transforming flat fabric into sculptural shapes that somehow look both architectural and soft. She adds feathers, silk flowers and ribbons with an artist's eye, creating something that transcends mere function to become a work of art. Magnificent, you whisper, not meaning to speak aloud. Mrs. Carter glances up, catching your eye. It takes years, she says, correctly interpreting your admiration. But yes, it is satisfying work when done properly. By the time you leave that evening, your fingers are pricked and sore. Your eyes strain from focusing on tiny stitches all day, and your shoulders ache from maintaining the same position for hours. But there's a lightness in your step that wasn't there yesterday. You're exhausted. You're terrified about money. 2 shillings a week will barely cover rent and food, leaving nothing for savings or emergencies. You miss the relative security of the boarding house, where at least meals were provided. But for the first time in years, you're also excited. This work has purpose. It has a future. It has the potential to become something more than mere survival. As you walk back to your lodgings in the fading light, you pass wealthy women in carriages wearing hats not unlike the one Mrs. Carter created today. Once you would have seen only the divide between their lives and yours. Now you see something else too, a connection, however tenuous. Their hats and your hands, linked by thread and skill and the strange economy of Victorian womanhood. You're still a spinster by society's reckoning, but tonight, as you clutch your precious book of poems and think about tomorrow's work, you find that the word has lost some of its sting, because maybe, just maybe, being a spinster isn't just about what you lack. Maybe it's also about what you're building, a life, a skill, a future that belongs to no one but yourself. 3 months into your new life and the seasons have shifted. Summer heat bakes London's streets, making the millinery shop a sweatbox by midday. You wipe perspiration from your forehead as you carefully stitch silk flowers onto the brim of a fashionable bonnet. Not like that, Miss Pierce says, appearing suddenly at your shoulder. The cluster should be tighter. Unpick it and start again. You swallow a sigh and reach for your scissors. This is the 3rd time today you've had to redo your work, and your fingers are sore from the constant pricking of the needle. How many times do I need to tell you, she continues, her voice low enough that the customers browsing the front of the shop can't hear. These hats sell for more than you make in a month. Every detail must be perfect. Yes, Miss Pierce, you murmur, keeping your eyes down. She moves away, and you begin the delicate work of removing the tiny stitches without damaging the expensive silk. Next to you, Miss Walsh gives you a sympathetic glance. She had me redo an entire hat brim 6 times when I started, she whispers. It gets easier. This is the strange contradiction of your new life. The work is grueling. 10 hours a day of eye-straining, finger-numbing detail work. Your back constantly aches from hunching over your workstation. The pay is barely enough to survive on. And yet you're learning, growing, building something. Each day your stitches become more even, your eye for design more refined. Miss Beaumont has even nodded approvingly at some of your recent work. High praise from a woman so sparing with compliments. More than that, you're part of something now. The millinery shop has its own culture, its own rhythms and relationships. You're no longer invisible, but a recognized piece of this small world. The archival records I found from 1862 showed that skilled trades like millinery operated almost like guilds. You didn't just punch a clock, you joined a community with its own hierarchy, traditions, and unwritten rules. Beginners like Elizabeth would be tested constantly, not just on their skills, but on their resilience and commitment to the craft. You rework the flower cluster, this time making sure the blooms are arranged in a tighter, more pleasing formation. Your fingers move more confidently now, finding the right tension in the thread, the perfect placement of each petal. When Miss Pierce returns to inspect your work, she merely nods and moves on. Her version of enthusiastic approval. You allow yourself a small, private smile of triumph. At lunchtime, you sit in the back room with the other women, eating the bread and cheese you've brought from home. The conversation flows around you. Gossip about customers, complaints about the heat, discussion of the latest fashions from Paris. Did you see Lady Harwood's face when Miss Beaumont suggested the green feathers instead of the blue? Miss Walsh laughs. Looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. The green suits her colouring better, Mrs. Carter says authoritatively. Miss Beaumont has an excellent eye. Lady Harwood doesn't want what suits her, Miss Pierce counters. She wants what her sister-in-law had last week, only bigger and more impressive. Speaking of impressive, Miss Walsh turns to you. Your stitching has improved tremendously, Miss Harrington. Those roses you did yesterday were quite fine. The compliment catches you off guard. Thank you, you say, feeling your cheeks warm. I've had excellent teachers. Mrs. Carter smiles slightly. Flattery will get you everywhere, Miss Harrington. This easy camaraderie still feels new to you. At the boarding house, you were isolated. Neither family nor friend, just a pair of hands to perform tasks. Here, despite the hierarchy and occasional sharp corrections, you belong. After work, you walk home with Miss Walsh, Annie, as she's asked you to call her when you're not at the shop. The two of you have fallen into the habit of stopping at a small bakery on Fridays when the baker sells yesterday's goods at half price. Look, Annie says, pointing to a display of currant buns. 2 for a penny today. Shall we splurge? You hesitate, mentally calculating your budget. 2 shillings a week in wages, 1 shilling 6pence for rent. That leaves 6pence for food, coal, and any other necessities. A halfpenny for a bun is an extravagance, but it's been a long week of demanding work, and the rare treat might lift your spirits. Yes, you decide. Let's splurge. The bun, slightly stale but still sweet, is delicious. You and Annie eat as you walk, savouring each bite. Oh, I meant to tell you, Annie says between mouthfuls. Mrs. Fairchild is coming in tomorrow for a fitting. You should make sure you're nearby. Mrs. Fairchild is one of the shop's wealthiest clients, known for her exacting standards and generous tips to the girls who please her. Do you think Miss Beaumont would let me assist? You ask hopefully. Probably not directly, Annie admits, but if you happen to be working on trimmings in the vicinity, Mrs. Fairchild often asks opinions from everyone present. She fancies herself a great patroness of working women. You nod, understanding the strategy. In the complex ecosystem of the millinery shop, such small opportunities can lead to advancement and eventually higher wages. Victorian shopping wasn't just a transaction, it was a performance. Upper-class women didn't just buy things, they enacted their status through elaborate shopping rituals. They expected deference and flattery, but some, like our fictional Mrs. Fairchild, also saw themselves as benevolent figures, lifting up working-class women through their patronage. It was weird, patronizing, and still somehow better than being treated like furniture. Your lodgings on Greystone Lane have become more home-like over the past months. The small room you share with Emma, Sarah, and Jane is still cramped, but you've each found ways to carve out tiny territories of privacy. Your bed has a colourful quilt sent by your mother, and you've hung a small shelf above it where you keep your precious books, now numbering 3, with the addition of a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets found in a second-hand shop. Jane, the typist, has been teaching all of you to read the newspaper critically, pointing out biases and omissions in the reporting. She's involved with a women's discussion group that meets monthly to debate topics ranging from working conditions to voting rights. You should come to the next meeting, she tells you as you all prepare for bed that night. Miss Crawford is speaking about employment opportunities for middle-class women. She's quite compelling. You hesitate. Such meetings feel dangerously close to politics, territory your mother always warned was unbecoming for respectable women. But then again, is anything about your life now what your mother would have considered respectable? Perhaps I will, you say finally. Late in the night, you're awakened by the sound of coughing. Sarah, in the bed next to yours, is sitting up trying to muffle the harsh, racking sounds with her pillow. Sarah, you whisper, sitting up. Are you unwell? It's nothing, she whispers back hoarsely. Just a summer chill. Go back to sleep. But in the grey light of dawn, you can see her pillow is spotted with blood. Consumption, the disease everyone fears, that steals away so many young women in their prime. You need to rest, you tell her. Stay home today. She shakes her head frantically. I can't. Mr. Davis said if any of us miss another day this month, we needn't bother coming back at all. Emma sits up, her face concerned. Sarah, you're ill, properly ill, and I'll be properly homeless if I lose my position, Sarah counters, already rising shakily to dress. It will pass. It always does. You and Emma exchange worried glances, but what can you say? Sarah's fear is well-founded. In the brutal economics of Victorian employment, workers were utterly disposable. Illness was considered a moral failing as much as a physical one, a sign of weakness or poor constitution. So Sarah goes to work, her face pale but determined. You go to your own job with her cough echoing in your ears, a reminder of how precarious this independence truly is. Mrs. Fairchild does indeed come to the shop that day, sweeping in with a rustle of expensive silk and the scent of French perfume. Just as Annie predicted, Miss Beaumont allows you to work nearby, arranging silk flowers for another order while the wealthy customer is attended to. Oh, these are lovely, Mrs. Fairchild says, noticing the small blossoms in your hands. Are they for my hat? Before Miss Beaumont can intervene, you reply, No, ma'am, these are for Mrs. Henderson's bonnet, but they would complement your colouring beautifully. Miss Beaumont gives you a sharp look for speaking directly to the customer, but Mrs. Fairchild seems pleased by your observation. Would they indeed? Perhaps we should reconsider the trimming, Miss Beaumont. This young woman has a good eye. Your heart pounds as Miss Beaumont smoothly redirects the conversation, neither confirming nor denying your suggestion. You've overstepped and there will likely be consequences later, but Mrs. Fairchild has noticed you, and in the complex calculus of the shop that counts for something. Sure enough, when the customer leaves, having ordered a hat with flowers suspiciously similar to the ones you were arranging, Miss Beaumont calls you into her office. Miss Harrington, she says coolly. While your observation about the flowers was not incorrect, you must remember your place. Customers should be addressed only when they speak to you directly, and even then with the utmost deference. Yes, Miss Beaumont, you say, eyes lowered. I apologize for my presumption. However, she continues, her tone softening slightly, Mrs. Fairchild was impressed by your aesthetic judgment. She has specifically requested that you assist with the trimming of her hat. You look up, startled. Me? Under Mrs. Carter's supervision, of course. You're not ready for independent work of that caliber, but it's an opportunity to learn from our most experienced milliner, working on a premium commission. She pauses. Don't squander it. I won't, Miss Beaumont. Thank you. As you leave her office, you can't help the small smile that tugs at your lips. It's a tiny victory, but a victory nonetheless. A step forward. That evening, you go with Jane to the women's discussion meeting, held in the back room of a small tea shop. About 20 women are gathered there, most appearing to be from the middle classes, though a few, like you and Jane, are clearly working women. Miss Crawford, the speaker, is a formidable-looking woman in her 40s, dressed in severe but fashionable attire. She speaks with confidence about the changing landscape of women's employment. The census of 1851 confirmed what many of us already knew, she tells the assembled group. There are simply not enough men for every woman to marry. Society must acknowledge this reality and create pathways for women to support themselves with dignity. Her words resonate with you. How many times had you been made to feel like a failure for not securing a husband, as if the demographics were your personal moral shortcoming rather than a simple mathematical fact? The question should not be, why are these women unmarried? Miss Crawford continues, but rather, how can we ensure these women have opportunities for meaningful work and independence? Around you, heads nod in agreement. The term surplus women makes you wince, as if you're excess inventory in a warehouse, but the acknowledgement of your existence, your right to a place in society, feels revolutionary. After the speech, small groups form for discussion. You find yourself in conversation with 3 other women, Jane, a governess named Miss Taylor, and a quiet woman in her 30s who introduces herself as Miss Pembroke, a bookkeeper. What did you think of the speech? Miss Pembroke asks you. It was illuminating, you reply carefully, still wary of expressing political opinions too freely. I hadn't considered the census figures in quite that light before. It changes the narrative, doesn't it? Miss Taylor says eagerly. Instead of pitying the poor spinster, society ought to be ensuring she has the education and opportunity to support herself. Precisely, Jane agrees, though I think Miss Crawford could have gone further. It's not just about survival, but about women having the chance to pursue their own ambitions, just as men do. The conversation continues, flowing from employment to education to the broader question of women's place in society. You mostly listen, occasionally offering observations from your own experience. It's exhilarating to hear your private thoughts echoed and expanded upon by these thoughtful, articulate women. On the walk home, Jane is animated, discussing the various points raised in the meeting. You're quieter, processing all you've heard. What did you really think? She asks finally. Too radical for you? You consider the question carefully. Not too radical, you say slowly. More like, I've felt these things but never heard them spoken aloud. It's strange to discover your private thoughts are actually part of a larger conversation. She smiles. That's how movements begin. Individual discontent becomes collective action. I wouldn't call myself discontented, you protest. I'm fortunate to have found decent employment. Are you, though? Jane challenges gently, working 10 hours a day for wages that barely cover your needs, having to choose between a currant bun and saving for emergencies, being told you should be grateful for the chance to serve others. Put that way, it does sound rather bleak. Yet compared to the boarding house, compared to the workhouse, compared to so many women's situations... It's a beginning, you say finally, not an ending. Jane squeezes your arm. That's the spirit. We start where we are and build from there. When you reach your lodgings, you find Emma waiting anxiously by the door. Thank goodness you're back, she says, pulling you both inside. It's Sarah. The coughing got worse. Mrs. Davis sent her home early and she's been bringing up blood. You rush upstairs to find Sarah in bed, her face alarmingly pale against the pillow. Her breathing is laboured and a handkerchief spotted with blood is clutched in her hand. I've sent for the doctor, Emma says, wringing her hands, but you know how they are about coming to this neighbourhood. Victorian medicine was a hit-or-miss affair, especially if you weren't wealthy. Doctors might prescribe everything from bleedings to mercury to cocaine, depending on their training and preferences, and many simply wouldn't bother with poor patients, knowing the fee might never be paid. We need to cool her fever, you say decisively, falling back on your mother's remedies. Jane, could you fetch water? Emma, help me get her into a fresh nightgown. She's soaked through with sweat. The three of you work together, caring for Sarah as best you can. The doctor eventually arrives, a young man with kind eyes who examines Sarah thoroughly before delivering his verdict. Consumption, as I'm sure you've guessed, he tells you quietly, stepping aside from the bed. Not advanced, but concerning. She needs rest, good food, and clean air. For how long, you ask, already calculating the financial implications. At least a month, possibly longer. A month without wages, a month of rent and food to somehow cover. The four of you exchange glances, the same thought in all your minds. How? I have some savings, Jane offers. Not much, but enough to help with her share of the rent for a few weeks. We can take in sewing, Emma suggests. Extra work in the evenings. And I might be able to ask for a small advance on my wages, you add, though the thought of approaching Miss Beaumont with such a request makes your stomach clench. The doctor watches this exchange with interest. You ladies aren't family. Not by blood, Jane answers with a slight lift of her chin, but we look after our own. He nods, seemingly impressed. I'll return in 3 days to check on her progress, keep her comfortable, make sure she drinks plenty of fluids, and open the windows when the air outside is clean. After he leaves, the three of you sit by Sarah's bed, discussing plans in low voices. You'll take turns staying home with her, using precious days off and negotiating with your respective employers. You'll pool resources for medicine and nutritious food. You'll make it work somehow. This is the hidden safety net of Victorian spinsterhood, the community of women who create family where society says none should exist. It's not perfect, not secure, certainly not easy, but it's real and vital and sometimes the only thing standing between survival and disaster. As you finally go to bed in the early hours of the morning, exhausted from worry and planning, you think about Miss Crawford's speech. The world might see you as surplus women, but there's nothing surplus about the bonds you're forming, the lives you're building. Tomorrow, you'll go back to the millinery shop, back to the endless hours of detailed work for meagre pay. You'll assist Mrs. Carter with Mrs. Fairchild's premium hat commission. You'll keep your eyes down and your voice respectful and your ambitions carefully hidden. But something has shifted. The conversations from the meeting echo in your mind, mingling with the practical challenges of caring for Sarah, the small triumph of impressing a wealthy customer, the ongoing struggle to transform yourself from invisible servant to skilled artisan. You are a Victorian spinster, unmarried at 25, making your way in a world designed for dependence, society may still view you as an object of pity or scorn. But tonight, lying in your narrow bed in a room shared with women who have become more family than mere roommates, you feel something unexpected, not contentment exactly. The challenges are too great, the future too uncertain for that. But possibility. The possibility that being a spinster isn't the end of your story, but the beginning, and that perhaps is worth more than all the security marriage might have offered. Autumn arrives with its peculiar London mix of fog, coal smoke and decaying leaves. 6 months into your new life, and the changes have been subtle but significant. Your fingers, once soft from years of household work, now bear the permanent calluses of a milliner. Your eye has sharpened, able to spot an uneven stitch or misplaced trim from across the workroom. And your wages have increased from 2 shillings to 2 shillings and 6pence per week. A small victory, but in the precarious economics of your life, those extra 6pence make a meaningful difference. Sarah has recovered enough to return to work, though her cough persists, especially in the damp mornings. The 4 of you managed to cover her expenses during her illness, but it depleted everyone's meagre savings. Now you're all working extra hours where possible, trying to rebuild that fragile safety net. Miss Harrington, Miss Beaumont calls from the front of the shop. Mrs. Fairchild is here for her final fitting. Please assist Mrs. Carter. You set aside the wire frame you've been covering and move to the front where Mrs. Fairchild waits in a cloud of expensive perfume. The hat you helped create, a confection of green velvet with silk flowers cascading down one side, rests on the counter. Ah, the young woman with the good eye, Mrs. Fairchild says, recognizing you. Tell me honestly, does this suit my complexion as well as you suggested it would? Mrs. Carter shoots you a warning glance. Direct opinions are still not your place, but Mrs. Fairchild is clearly expecting an answer. It complements you beautifully, ma'am, you say carefully. The particular shade of green brings out the warmth in your eyes. Mrs. Fairchild beams, turning to examine herself in the mirror with the hat perched atop her elaborately styled hair. You're quite right. Much better than that dreadful blue my sister-in-law chose. I shall wear this to Lady Montgomery's tea next week, and Charlotte will be positively green herself, with envy. She laughs at her own joke, and you smile politely, helping Mrs. Carter make a small adjustment to the hat's position. The young woman has talent, Mrs. Fairchild comments to Miss Beaumont, who has materialized nearby. You should nurture it. Miss Harrington is coming along quite well, Miss Beaumont agrees with measured praise. We have hopes for her progress. After the customer leaves with her purchase, Miss Beaumont calls you into her office again. Your stomach tightens with anxiety. Have you overstepped again, despite your care? Mrs. Fairchild was very pleased with her hat, Miss Beaumont begins, her expression giving nothing away. She specifically mentioned your contribution. Mrs. Carter deserves the credit, you say quickly. I merely assisted with the smallest details. Indeed, however, your eye for colour and proportion has been noticed. She taps her fingers on her desk, studying you. I believe you're ready for more responsibility. Beginning next week, you'll assist Miss Pierce with design consultations for our middle-tier customers. Your heart skips. Design consultations mean direct customer interaction, a step up from basic construction work, and potentially better pay in the future. Thank you, Miss Beaumont, you say, trying to keep your voice steady. I'm grateful for the opportunity. She nods briskly. Don't disappoint me. You may return to your work now. You float back to your workstation, barely feeling the floor beneath your feet. Annie glances up, raising an eyebrow in question. Design consultations, you whisper, with Miss Pierce. Her eyes widen, and she gives you a quick smile before returning to her work. Later, she'll want all the details, but for now, the workroom discipline must be maintained. By evening, the news has spread among the shop's employees. When you leave with Annie, she links her arm through yours, excitedly. Design consultations after only 6 months, she says. It took me nearly 2 years to move up from basic construction. Miss Beaumont must see real potential in you. Or Mrs. Fairchild's approval carries more weight than we realise, you suggest, still unable to quite believe your good fortune. Perhaps, but Miss Beaumont isn't easily swayed by customers' opinions. She knows quality work when she sees it. The warm glow of professional recognition carries you all the way back to your lodgings, where you share the news with your housemates. We should celebrate, Jane declares. I've been saving a bit of sugar. We could make barley water with lemon. Such a simple treat, but in your world, it's a luxury worth savouring. As the 4 of you sit around the room's small table, sipping the sweet tart drink, Emma raises her cup in a toast to Elizabeth and her swift ascent in the millinery world. Soon she'll be opening her own shop and employing all of us. You laugh, but there's a seed of possibility in the joke. Could you, someday? Women did own businesses in Victorian London, though the challenges were considerable. Still, the thought of a shop with your name on the sign sends a pleasant shiver down your spine. Speaking of advancement, Jane says, there's another meeting next week. A woman from Manchester is speaking about the formation of women's trade unions. You should all come. Emma shakes her head. Mr. Davis already watches us like a hawk. If he heard I was involved with unions, I'd be dismissed on the spot. That's exactly why unions are necessary, Jane argues. The arbitrary power employers hold over our livelihoods is unconscionable. Unions were starting to form for many trades in Victorian England, but they were still controversial. Men's unions were becoming more established, but women's unions, those were seen as particularly radical. Women organising for better pay and conditions challenged the whole idea that women should work for the love of it or out of desperate necessity, not as a career with standards and rights. The discussion continues, passionate but good-natured, until Sarah's coughing interrupts. You all turn with concern as she presses a handkerchief to her mouth. Just the damp, she insists when the spasm passes. I'm much better, truly. But her face is too pale, and the handkerchief, which she quickly tucks away, bears fresh spots of blood. The doctor's visits have continued, though less frequently, and his expression grows more concerned each time. That night, as you prepare for bed, Jane pulls you aside. We need to talk about Sarah, she whispers. The doctor says she shouldn't be working in the shop. All that dust from the fabrics is making her worse. But she can't stop working, you whisper back. None of us can afford to support her indefinitely. I know, but there might be another option. Jane glances over to make sure Sarah and Emma are out of earshot. My uncle has a cottage in Sussex. It's small, just 2 rooms, but it's in the countryside. Clean air, quiet surroundings. He's agreed to let Sarah stay there for a nominal rent, just enough to cover basic maintenance. That's wonderful, you exclaim softly. But how would she live? What would she eat? That's the challenge, Jane admits. She'd need some income. I thought perhaps piecework, sewing she could do at her own pace, in good light, with fresh air. The idea has merit. Many women did piecework from home, making gloves, finishing garments, or creating small items that could be sold to shops in London. The pay was even worse than regular employment, but for someone in Sarah's condition, it might be the only viable option. We should ask at the shop, you suggest. Miss Beaumont might know of suppliers looking for pieceworkers. Jane nods. I was hoping you'd say that. Sarah respects you. She's more likely to consider it if you're supportive. The responsibility settles on your shoulders, another small weight in a life already laden with them. Yet strangely, it doesn't feel burdensome. 6 months ago, you were adrift, a woman without purpose or place. Now you're embedded in a network of care and obligation that gives meaning to each day. The next morning, you approach Mrs. Carter during a quiet moment. Of all the senior staff, she's shown you the most kindness, and her connections in the trade are extensive. "A friend with consumption," she repeats when you explain the situation. "How severe?" "Improving, but the doctor says she needs country air. She's skilled with a needle. She works at Davis's draper's shop currently." Mrs. Carter considers. "As it happens, my sister runs a small business making baby clothes. Fine work, mostly for the middle-class trade. She often needs extra hands, especially as the Christmas season approaches. The pay isn't much." "Anything would help," you assure her. "I'll speak with her then. No promises, but she's a soft touch for a worthy case." You thank her profusely, hope blooming in your chest. It's not a perfect solution, but it's something, a chance for Sarah to heal, to perhaps escape the fate that claims so many young working women in London. That Sunday, you're 1 day free from the shop. You take a rare trip across town to visit your mother. The omnibus fare is a luxury you allow yourself monthly, unwilling to lose the fragile connection to your past. Your mother's lodgings are humble, a single room in a house owned by a distant cousin who took pity after your father's death. She supports herself with seamstress work now, though her failing eyesight makes it increasingly difficult. "Elizabeth," she exclaims as you enter, rising to embrace you. "You look well. The work agrees with you." You hug her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender water and clean linen. "It does, Mother. How are your eyes?" "No worse," she says, which you know means no better. "Tell me about the shop. Are they treating you fairly?" You settle at her small table, sharing the tea and bread she's prepared for your visit. You tell her about your promotion to design consultations, about Mrs. Fairchild's approval, about the techniques you're learning. "I always knew you had a gift with the needle," she says proudly. "Your father would be so pleased to see you establishing yourself." Would he, though? Wouldn't he rather have seen you safely married, conforming to society's expectations? You don't voice these doubts, unwilling to dim her pleasure in your modest success. "And what of your living situation?" she asks carefully. 4 young women alone. It's most unusual." "We manage well enough," you assure her. "We look after each other." She hesitates, then says, "Mrs. Pembroke mentioned she saw you at a meeting of a political nature." Your spine stiffens. Mrs. Pembroke must be related to the quiet bookkeeper from the women's discussion group, and apparently not as discreet as one might hope. "It was an educational talk," you say carefully, "about employment opportunities for women." Your mother sighs. "Elizabeth, I understand the necessity of your working, but involving yourself in politics, it's not proper for a young woman of your background." "Mother, it was hardly revolutionary, just women discussing practical matters that affect our lives." "Even so," she takes your hand. "I worry for your reputation. Without that, what hope is there for your future?" She means marriage, of course. Despite everything, your age, your circumstances, the demographic realities, she still clings to the hope that you'll somehow conform to the expected path for women. "My reputation is intact," you say gently. "I'm known as a skilled and dedicated worker, nothing more." She squeezes your hand. "You're a good daughter. I just want to see you secure." The familiar guilt washes over you. Your mother sacrificed everything after your father's death to keep you from the workhouse. Your current independence feels almost like a betrayal of her dreams for you. I am secure, you tell her, with more confidence than you feel, more so each day. The visit continues with safer topics, news of family acquaintances, the rising price of coal, a letter received from your brother James, now established in his printing apprenticeship in Manchester. As you prepare to leave, your mother presses a small package into your hands. New gloves, she says. I noticed yours were wearing thin last time. A milliner should have respectable hands. The gift must represent hours of eye-straining work. Mother, you shouldn't have... Let me do this small thing, she interrupts. You're all I have left here in London. You embrace her again, throat tight with emotion. The gap between her world and yours grows wider with each passing month, yet the love remains constant, a bridge across the divide. On the omnibus ride back to your lodgings, you watch London flow past the windows, the elegant homes of the wealthy, the bustling commercial streets, the crowded tenements, so many lives, so many stories, all overlapping and intersecting in this vast, dirty, vibrant city. Your own story is such a small thread in this tapestry, a young woman, neither wealthy nor desperately poor, navigating the narrow path between dependence and destitution, a spinster by society's reckoning, yet increasingly unconcerned with that label. The next week brings change on multiple fronts. Mrs. Carter's sister agrees to provide piecework for Sarah, sending small bundles of baby clothes to be finished with delicate embroidery. The pay is meagre, just a few pence per item, but combined with the low rent for the Sussex cottage, it might be enough for basic survival. The real question is whether Sarah will accept the plan. That evening, the four of you sit together in your small room, laying out the proposal. All Sussex? Sarah repeats, her face pale in the gaslight. Leave London? Just until you're fully recovered, Jane explains gently. The doctor says your lungs need clean air. But I'd be alone, Sarah protests, fear edging her voice. I've never lived alone. This was the reality for so many Victorian women. The urban migration that brought millions to cities like London wasn't just about work opportunities, it was about community. The idea of a solitary existence, especially for a woman raised with the constant presence of family and neighbours, was genuinely terrifying. It would only be temporary, Emma assures her, and we'd visit when we can. The train fare to Sussex isn't so very great, you add, though it represents a significant expense for any of you. Perhaps once a month? Sarah twists her hands in her lap, torn between fear of isolation and the undeniable fact that her health is deteriorating in London's polluted air. I don't know, she says finally. I need time to think. You exchange glances with Jane and Emma, silently agreeing not to press further tonight. The decision must be Sarah's own. At the millinery shop, your new responsibilities begin. Miss Pearce, though still exacting in her standards, proves to be a knowledgeable mentor, teaching you the subtle art of guiding customers toward choices that flatter them while making them believe the ideas were entirely their own. Mrs. Abernathy always chooses purple, regardless of whether it suits her complexion, she murmurs to you before a consultation. Our task is to lead her gently toward the lavender, which is more flattering, while letting her believe she's getting the deep purple she thinks she wants. It's a delicate dance of suggestion and deference, one that requires careful observation of each customer's temperament. Some want to be guided firmly, others respond only to the most subtle hints, and still others must be allowed to make their own choices, even if the results are less than ideal. The work is mentally taxing in a way basic construction was not, but also more engaging. You find yourself studying fashion plates with new attention, analysing the relationship between hat styles and face shapes, colours and complexions. You have a natural eye for it, Miss Pierce comments one afternoon, after a particularly successful consultation with a difficult customer. Not everyone does, you know. Some can master the technical skills, but never develop the aesthetic judgment. Coming from Miss Pierce, this is high praise indeed. You thank her, trying not to show how deeply the compliment affects you. That evening, as you walk home with Annie, she nudges your arm playfully. Soon you'll be taking my place as junior milliner, and I'll be jealous. Lee, you scoff. I've miles to go before I reach your skill level. Perhaps, but you're advancing quickly. Miss Beaumont has noticed. We all have. Her words warm you, even as you deflect the praise. 6 months ago, you were invisible, a servant in a boarding house. Now you're a recognized member of a skilled trade with prospects for advancement. The transformation still feels fragile, miraculous. When you reach your lodgings, you find Mr. Patterson waiting outside, a book tucked under his arm. Your heart gives an odd little jump at the sight of him. Miss Harrington, he says, doffing his hat. I hoped I might catch you. Annie gives you a significant look before tactfully excusing herself to go inside, leaving you alone with the young law student. Mr. Patterson, you respond, conscious of maintaining proper formality on a public street. How unexpected. I was passing through the neighbourhood, he explains, though the boarding house where he still lives is nowhere near Greystone Lane. I found this and thought of you. He hands you the book, a collection of essays by Mary Wollstonecraft. Your eyes widen. Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman was published in the 1790s, but in Victorian England her ideas about women's education and equality were still considered quite radical. This is quite a provocative choice, you say carefully, unsure of his intentions. He smiles slightly. I attended a lecture at my law society where her work was referenced. It made me curious. After reading it, I thought you might find it interesting given your circumstances. My circumstances? A woman making her own way in the world, he clarifies. Successfully, by all appearances. You're not entirely sure whether to be flattered or offended. Thank you for thinking of me, you say neutrally, though I'm not sure I have time for political philosophy between my work hours. It's not just political, he insists. It's practical, about education and opportunity. He hesitates, then adds, I've admired the way you've established yourself since leaving the boarding house. It can't have been easy. The compliment catches you off guard. It hasn't been, you admit, but it's been worthwhile. A moment of silence stretches between you, not entirely uncomfortable. Mr. Patterson seems about to say something else when the door opens and Emma appears. Elizabeth, you're needed inside, she says, giving Mr. Patterson a curious glance. Sarah's made a decision about Sussex. I should go, you tell him, tucking the book carefully into your bag. Thank you for the loan. Keep it, he says. It's yours, and perhaps when you've had a chance to read some of it, we might discuss it. Over tea, maybe. Your pulse quickens. Is this a social invitation from a young man of good family to a working milliner? The impropriety is mild. A public tea shop would be acceptable, but the crossing of class boundaries is significant. Perhaps, you say non-committally. Good evening, Mr. Patterson. Inside, your housemates pounce immediately. Who was that? Emma demands. And why was he giving you books? Just a former boarder from Mrs. Wilson's, you explain, feeling your cheeks warm. We sometimes discussed literature. Jane raises an eyebrow. He's handsome, and clearly went out of his way to find you. It's not like that. you insist, though you're not entirely sure what it is. What's this about Sarah making a decision? The change of subject works. Sarah, sitting on her bed with a shawl wrapped around her thin shoulders despite the room's warmth, looks up with resolute eyes. "I've decided to go to Sussex," she says. "You're all right. I need to get well, truly well, not just well enough to work, and I can't do that here. Relief washes through you. That's very wise, Sarah. We'll help you make the arrangements." "There's something else," she continues, her voice stronger now that the decision is made. "Jane's uncle, he says there's a small school in the village near the cottage. They need someone to teach the youngest children basic letters and numbers. The pay is minimal, but combined with the piecework—" "That sounds perfect," you say, genuinely pleased. Sarah had mentioned once that she'd always wanted to be a teacher but lacked the formal education necessary for a proper governess position. A village school with minimal requirements might be ideal. "It's only temporary," Sarah emphasizes. "Once I'm fully recovered, I'll return to London." You all nod, though privately you wonder if she will. The Sussex cottage represents not just clean air but a different life path, quieter, perhaps more suited to her gentle nature. London's frenetic pace and harsh conditions might never again seem appealing once she's escaped them. That night, after the others are asleep, you take out the book Mr. Patterson gave you. By the dim light of a candle stub, you read Mary Wollstonecraft's passionate arguments for women's education and rational thinking. Her words, written nearly 70 years earlier, still feel revolutionary, a demand for women to be recognized as thinking beings, not merely ornaments or vessels. What would she make of your life, you wonder? A spinster at 25, working in a traditionally female trade, living independently with other women. Would she see it as progress or merely a different form of limitation? You close the book, extinguish the candle and lie in the darkness, listening to the breathing of your friends. Outside, London continues its nocturnal rumble. Carriages on cobblestones, distant factory whistles, the occasional shout or laugh from late revellers. This is your world now, not the domestic sphere your mother inhabited, nor the married life she still hopes you'll find, but something else, something still taking shape, like a hat form in the millinery shop, gradually acquiring definition and purpose. And despite all its challenges, despite the uncertainty that shadows every decision, you wouldn't trade it. Not yet, not when each day brings new skills, new connections, new possibilities. You drift towards sleep, your mind still circling around Miss Pierce's praise, Mr. Patterson's unexpected gift, Sarah's difficult choice, your mother's conflicted pride. So many threads pulling in different directions, weaving the complex fabric of your life as a Victorian spinster. Not a failure, not an object of pity, but a woman standing on her own feet in a world that never expected her to. A year passes, marked by the rhythms of the millinery shop, the spring rush of new styles, the summer lull, the autumn revival, the winter flurry of holiday orders. London's seasons blend into one another through fog and rain and rare, precious days of sunshine. And with time, the once strange becomes familiar. Your hands move with confidence now, creating shapes from wire and fabric, transforming flat materials into dimensional art. Your voice no longer trembles when you offer suggestions to customers. Your wages have increased again, 3 shillings per week now, enough to occasionally buy a second-hand book or send a small package of tea to Sarah in Sussex. You've moved up in the shop's hierarchy too. When Miss Walsh left to marry a clockmaker from Manchester, Miss Beaumont surprised everyone by promoting you to junior milliner, skipping over 2 girls with more seniority. She earned it, you overheard Mrs. Carter tell a disgruntled colleague. The girl has more natural talent than either Thompson or Davis, and she works twice as hard. The position brings new responsibilities, training newcomers, handling more complex designs, dealing directly with the mid-tier clientele who make up the bulk of the shop's business. It also means you have a small workstation of your own rather than sharing the long communal table, a physical manifestation of your elevated status. This March morning, you're carefully pinning silk roses to a straw bonnet when Miss Beaumont approaches. Your heart still skips whenever she singles you out, conditioned by years of expecting criticism from authority figures. "Miss Harrington," she says, her voice as precise as her impeccable appearance. "Mrs. Fairchild has requested you specifically for her spring order. She was most impressed with your work on her winter hat." Pride blooms in your chest, though you keep your expression properly modest. "I'm honoured, Miss Beaumont. Will she be coming in today?" "Next Tuesday at 2. She mentioned she'll be bringing her niece as well, recently arrived from the country and in need of a proper London wardrobe." "I'll prepare some design options before her arrival." Miss Beaumont nods, almost smiling. "See that you do. Mrs. Fairchild's patronage is valuable to us, and her approval carries weight among her circle." After she walks away, you allow yourself a small, private smile. These moments of recognition still feel miraculous, evidence of how far you've come from the invisible boarding house assistant of last year. That evening, as you leave the shop, a familiar figure waits across the street. Mr. Patterson, now a qualified junior clerk at a respectable law firm. Your relationship has evolved into something neither of you quite define. Not courtship exactly, but more than mere acquaintance. Once a month or so, he appears like this, suggesting a walk through a nearby park or, on special occasions, tea at a modest but respectable establishment. You discuss books, ideas, sometimes the cases he's working on or the designs you're creating. He lends you volumes from his own small library, philosophy, poetry, increasingly radical political texts that would shock your mother. "Miss Harrington," he greets you, tipping his hat. "I thought I might find you here." "Mr. Patterson," you reply, unable to suppress a smile. What a coincidence. The formality of your address has become something of a private joke between you, necessary in public for propriety's sake, but amusingly stiff given the topics you've discussed. "I wondered if you might be free for a walk," he says, falling into step beside you. "The weather is surprisingly clement for March." "I'd like that," you reply. As you stroll toward the small square where you often take your conversations, he asks about your work, listening with genuine interest to your description of the new spring styles and Mrs. Fairchild's special request. "Your reputation grows," he observes. "Soon you'll be London's most sought-after milliner." You laugh. "Hardly, though I have been given more responsibility lately." "And deservedly so, I'm sure." He hesitates, then adds, "Actually, I had a particular reason for seeking you out today. I've been offered a position at a firm in Manchester." Your steps falter slightly. "Manchester? That's quite far." "Indeed, it's a good opportunity. Better pay, more interesting cases. The firm specializes in industrial disputes, which aligns with my interests." "When would you leave?" you ask, trying to keep your voice neutral. "End of the month. The timing is somewhat precipitous, but such opportunities don't arise often for junior clerks." You nod, unsure how to respond. Mr. Patterson has become a fixture in your new life, a connection to intellectual ideas beyond the millinery shop, a reminder that you exist as more than just a worker. His departure will leave a gap. "I wanted to ask," he continues, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain, "if you might permit me to write to you from Manchester." The request catches you off guard. Letter writing suggests a level of intimacy beyond your current arrangement, yet the idea pleases you more than you expected. I think I would like that, you say carefully. He smiles, visibly relieved. Excellent. I valued our conversations greatly, Miss Harrington. I would hate to lose them entirely. As have I, Mr. Patterson. The walk continues, conversation shifting to safer topics, a new exhibition at the British Museum, the increasing omnibus routes throughout London, the unseasonable warmth, but underneath runs a current of something undefined, a recognition of something ending, and perhaps something else beginning. When you part ways an hour later, he takes your hand briefly, a liberty, but not a shocking one between friends of long acquaintance. Until next time, Miss Harrington. Safe travels, Mr. Patterson. I shall look forward to your letters. Victorian social norms were a wild mess of contradictions, public hand-holding between unmarried men and women, scandalous but exchanging intensely personal letters, totally fine as long as you addressed each other formally. Chaperoned courtship with careful distance, required lending a woman radical feminist literature, no problem apparently. Looking back now, it's no wonder nobody could keep track of all the rules. Back at your lodgings, you find Jane poring over a newspaper, her face alight with excitement. "Have you seen this?" she asks as soon as you enter, gesturing to the paper. The first Women's Suffrage Committee has formed. They're petitioning Parliament for voting rights. You scan the small article, tucked away on the third page. Do they have any chance of success? Not immediately, Jane admits. But it's a beginning. 10 years ago, no one would have dared form such a committee publicly. Though the suffrage movement had been brewing since the 1850s, it was picking up serious momentum by the mid-1860s. The problem wasn't just that women couldn't vote. They were legally classified with lunatics, idiots, and criminals as people unfit to participate in democracy. Can't imagine why that might have rubbed some women the wrong way. Emma, now the only one of your original housemates still sharing your lodgings, looks up from her sewing. Politics, she sighs, I still don't see how any of it affects us. Whether men or women make the laws, we'll still work 12 hours a day for pitiful wages. That's precisely why it matters, Jane counters. With the vote comes power to change those conditions. These discussions have become regular features of your household. Jane's political involvement has deepened over the past year. She now serves as secretary to a women's trade association and attends lectures by prominent feminist thinkers whenever her limited free time allows. You find yourself increasingly drawn to these ideas, though more cautiously than Jane. Your position at the millinery shop is too precious to risk with radical associations, yet the arguments for women's greater participation in public life resonate deeply with your daily experiences. A letter came for you, Emma says, changing the subject. She hands you an envelope addressed in a now familiar hand, Sarah's careful script. You open it eagerly. Sarah's letters from Sussex have become monthly fixtures, chronicling her life in the small village where she now teaches at the local school. Dear friends, you read aloud for all to benefit. The spring has arrived early here, with daffodils already appearing in the cottage garden. My health continues to improve. Dr. Miller says my lungs sound clearer each month, and I haven't had a serious coughing episode in nearly 6 weeks. The letter continues with news of her pupils, the local vicar's new wife, the piecework that supplements her meagre teaching income. Her words paint a picture of a life different from but no less meaningful than yours in London. Quieter, perhaps, but with its own satisfactions. She sounds content, Emma observes when you finish reading. I never thought our Sarah would adapt to country life. Necessity makes adaptable creatures of us all, Jane says, but without bitterness. At least she's regaining her health. You fold the letter carefully, thinking of Sarah's journey from desperately ill shop girl to rural school teacher, another path none of you had imagined a year ago. The next day at the shop, you're sketching design options for Mrs. Fairchild when Miss Beaumont approaches, accompanied by a slight young woman you don't recognise. Miss Harrington, this is Miss Clark. She's joining us as an apprentice and will be working under your supervision. You set aside your sketches, studying the new girl. She can't be more than 16, with the wide-eyed look of someone fresh from the countryside. Her dress is neat, but clearly homemade, her hands already showing signs of household labour. "Welcome to Beaumont Millinery, Miss Clark," you say, remembering your own first day with painful clarity. "Have you worked with a needle before?" "Yes, miss," she replies, her accent marking her as from somewhere in the north. "I did all the sewing for my family back home." 6 younger siblings, miss. "That's excellent experience," you tell her, gesturing for her to sit at the workstation adjacent to yours. "We'll start with basic stitches to ensure your technique meets our standards." As you guide Miss Clark through her first tasks, you find yourself repeating phrases you once heard from Mrs. Carter and Miss Pierce, correcting her posture, demonstrating the proper tension for different fabrics, explaining the shop's standards and hierarchies. When did you become the experienced one, the authority? The transformation has been so gradual you hardly noticed it happening, but here you are, teaching rather than learning, guiding rather than following. There's power in this role, you realise, not just over Miss Clark's immediate tasks, but over how she experiences her entry into this world. You can make it as harsh or as supportive as you choose. "That's well done," you tell her when she completes her first sample stitches. You have a natural steadiness to your hand. Now try this finer silk. It requires a lighter touch. By day's end, Miss Clark has proven herself a quick study, her northern stoicism serving her well through the demanding hours and exacting standards. As you both prepare to leave, she looks at you with undisguised admiration. "Thank you for your patience today, Miss Harrington. Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house said I was lucky to be assigned to you rather than Miss Pierce." The mention of Mrs. Wilson startles you. "You're staying at Wilson's boarding house on Marylebone Road?" "Yes, miss. Do you know it?" You almost laugh at the question. "I worked there before coming to the millinery. Mrs. Wilson was my employer." Miss Clark's eyes widen. Truly, she didn't mention that, only that a former assistant had done well for herself at Beaumont's. "Well, for yourself." The phrase echoes in your mind as you walk home. Is that how Mrs. Wilson sees your journey? As success rather than desertion? The thought warms you unexpectedly. The following Tuesday, Mrs. Fairchild arrives for her appointment, trailing a fashionably dressed young woman you assume is the country niece in need of a London wardrobe. "Miss Harrington," Mrs. Fairchild greets you warmly. "This is my niece, Miss Eleanor Fairchild. She's in desperate need of your expertise. Country fashions are hopelessly behind, and she's to be presented at Lady Harrington's musical evening next week." You lead them to the consultation area, where you've arranged several design options based on the latest spring fashion plates and your knowledge of Mrs. Fairchild's preferences. As you discuss possibilities, you notice Miss Eleanor studying you with curious intensity. During a moment when her aunt is examining trim options, she leans forward slightly. Our aunt says you're quite remarkable, she murmurs, voice pitched for your ears only. She says you've risen from nothing to become a skilled artisan through your own merit. You maintain your professional smile, unsure how to respond to this assessment of your life journey. Your aunt is very kind. It's not kindness. Aunt Josephine is never kind merely for kindness' sake. She says you have an exceptional eye and ambition to match. Miss Eleanor's gaze is direct, almost challenging. I find that fascinating. Before you can reply, Mrs. Fairchild returns her attention to the consultation. Blue silk with white trim, I think, for Eleanor's first hat, something youthful but elegant. An excellent choice, ma'am, you agree, mentally adjusting the design to suit the niece's colouring and facial structure. Perhaps with a slightly higher crown than shown here, it would complement Miss Eleanor's height. The consultation continues, but you remain aware of the niece's assessing gaze throughout. When they finally leave, having ordered 3 hats between them, Miss Eleanor pauses at the door. I look forward to seeing your creations, Miss Harrington, she says, with peculiar emphasis. I suspect they'll be most illuminating. That evening, as you walk home, you puzzle over the encounter. There was something in Miss Eleanor's manner, a recognition perhaps, or a kinship, that felt significant. The city streets are unusually pleasant in the spring dusk, the worst of the coal smoke dissipated by a gentle breeze. Workers stream from factories and shops, their days ended, their brief hours of freedom beginning. Among them are hundreds of women like you, milliners, seamstresses, shop girls, factory workers, each with her own story, her own delicate balance of independence and security. You pass a newspaper boy shouting headlines about the suffrage petition, about labour unrest in the north, about the expanding railway system connecting Britain's industrial cities. The world is changing, gradually but undeniably, and women's places within it are changing too. At your lodgings, a letter awaits, not from Sarah this time, but from your brother James in Manchester. The sight of his handwriting brings an immediate smile. Though you exchange letters only every few months, the connection remains important, a thread binding you to your diminished family. Dear Lizzie, he writes, using the childhood nickname only he still employs. I trust this finds you well and thriving in your millinery endeavours. Mother writes that you've advanced in position. I'm not surprised, as you always had the steadiest hands of any of us. He continues with news of his own progress in the printing trade, having recently been promoted to compositor, setting type for a small but respectable newspaper. Then comes an unexpected paragraph. A curious coincidence. A new clerk has joined the legal firm that handles our newspaper's affairs. A Mr. Patterson recently arrived from London. In conversation, he mentioned knowing a milliner named Miss Harrington. I inquired further and determined it must indeed be you he spoke of. He speaks most highly of your intellect and character. I find myself wondering about the nature of your acquaintance, as he seemed particularly interested when I revealed our connection. You feel your cheeks warm as you read this, aware of Emma watching you with raised eyebrows. News from Manchester? She asks innocently. Just James, you reply, folding the letter. He's been promoted at the printing house. She nods, tactfully not pressing for more, though her expression suggests she's noted your blush. Later, in the quiet of the evening, as Emma works on mending and Jane has yet to return from a meeting, you reread James's letter, lingering on the mention of Mr. Patterson. So he's arrived safely in Manchester and already mentioned you to your brother. The thought produces a strange fluttering in your chest, not entirely comfortable, but not unpleasant either. You should respond to both James and Sarah soon, perhaps Mr. Patterson as well, now that you know he's settled in his new position. So many connections stretching across distance, binding your present to both past and possible futures. The next morning, Miss Clark arrives at the shop visibly distressed, her eyes red-rimmed and her hands trembling. "What's happened?" you ask, drawing her aside before Miss Beaumont can notice her state. "It's Mrs. Wilson," she whispers. "She's selling the boarding house. We all received notice last night. We have a month to find new lodgings." The news hits you with unexpected force. Mrs. Wilson's boarding house has been a fixture in your mental landscape, the place where your independent journey began. The idea of it changing hands, perhaps even changing purpose, feels like the removal of a cornerstone. "Did she say why?" you ask, guiding Miss Clark to your workstation where you can speak privately while appearing to be reviewing designs. Her sister in Bath has fallen ill. She's going to care for her and doesn't want the responsibility of the house from a distance. Miss Clark twists her hands anxiously. "I don't know where I'll go. The other boarding houses nearby are either too expensive or not respectable." You recognize the genuine fear beneath her words. For a young woman alone in London, safe lodging is the difference between security and desperate vulnerability. "Let me think," you say, your mind already turning over possibilities. "There might be a spare room in the house where I lodge. It would mean sharing with others, but the landlord is fair and the location is convenient to the shop." "Truly?" Hope brightens her face. "You'd help me inquire about it." "Of course," you assure her, surprising yourself with how automatically the offer comes. A year ago, you were the one in desperate need of guidance. Now you're in a position to extend that same lifeline to another. The wheel turns, you think, each of us moving from helplessness to capability, if we're fortunate, from receiving to giving, from isolation to community. That night, you write 3 letters to Sarah in Sussex, to James in Manchester, and after some hesitation to Mr. Patterson. Each represents a different facet of your expanding world, a different possible path extending from your present circumstances. To Sarah, you send news of the shop, of Jane's political activities, of the suffrage committee's formation. To James, you express pride in his promotion and casually inquire after his impression of Mr. Patterson. And to Mr. Patterson himself, you write a carefully worded letter that maintains propriety while expressing genuine interest in his new position and life in Manchester. As you seal the envelopes, you think about the woman you were a year ago, terrified but determined, stepping into an unknown future. That future has become your present, with its own challenges and satisfactions. Not the life your mother envisioned for you, certainly. Not the conventional path of marriage and domestic duties. Not even the desperate subsistence many predicted for surplus women unable to secure husbands. Instead, you found something else, a life built on skill and community, on meaningful work and chosen connections, a life that belongs wholly to you. Outside, London continues its ceaseless motion. Carriages and carts, factories and shops, millions of lives intersecting in the vast, grimy, vibrant metropolis. Among them, thousands of women like you are creating new patterns of existence, finding ways to thrive in the narrow spaces society allots them. You are a Victorian spinster, unmarried at 26, supporting yourself through skilled labour, living independently among other women. Society may still view this as failure or misfortune, but as you prepare for bed in your small but private corner of a shared room, surrounded by books and letters and evidence of growing connections, you know better. This is not the absence of a life. This is the presence of one you've built with your own hands, stitch by careful stitch. Autumn arrives again, painting London in russets and golds before the inevitable descent into the grey fog of winter. You've been at Beaumont Millinery for 18 months now, a lifetime in the constantly shifting landscape of your 20s. Miss Clark has settled into the rhythm of the shop, her northern practicality serving her well through the demanding apprenticeship. Thanks to your recommendation, she now shares lodgings with you and Emma, taking the room Jane vacated when she moved to larger quarters near the offices of the Women's Suffrage Committee, where she now works as a paid secretary. Your own position has solidified. You're now a full milliner, no longer junior, with authority to design and execute orders for all but the most prestigious customers. Your wages have reached 4 shillings per week, still meagre by many standards, but a small fortune compared to where you began. Most surprisingly, Mrs. Carter has taken to inviting you to accompany her on fabric buying expeditions. These trips to the wholesale merchants are educational in ways you never anticipated, not just about materials and prices, but about the business itself. Mrs. Carter seems increasingly willing to share her knowledge of suppliers, negotiations, and the financial aspects of millinery that Miss Beaumont keeps closely guarded. Always verify the quality yourself, she tells you as you examine a bolt of silk ribbon. Merchants will swear it's the finest French import when it's actually made in Spitalfields. Not that English silk can't be excellent, it often is, but you should pay English prices for it, not French. You nod, absorbing this like all her lessons. How do you tell the difference? Look at the weave here. See how it catches the light? French silk has a particular sheen, and the selvage, the French market differently. Little things, but they matter when you're paying by the yard. The trip yields not just materials for the shop, but another piece in your growing understanding of how the business operates. Each such expedition feels like being handed a key to a locked room, revealing more of the mechanisms behind the elegant hats that grace London's fashionable heads. Back at the shop, a letter awaits, the familiar Manchester postmark that still quickens your pulse slightly. Mr. Patterson's correspondence has become a regular feature of your life, arriving every 2 weeks with reassuring consistency. His letters have evolved over the months, from rather formal accounts of his new position to more personal reflections on his life in Manchester, the cases he's working on, and increasingly his thoughts on a range of topics, from the latest scientific discoveries to the growing movement for women's suffrage. You tuck the letter into your pocket for later, but the awareness of it lingers as you return to your workstation. There, Miss Beaumont has left a note requesting your presence in her office at the end of the day. Such summonses are rare and usually significant, leaving you to wonder what might prompt it as you complete your day's work. When the shop closes and the other women depart, you knock on Miss Beaumont's office door with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Enter," she calls, and you find her seated at her desk, reviewing accounts with her usual precision. "You wanted to see me, Miss Beaumont?" "Yes, Miss Harrington. Please sit." She gestures to the chair opposite her desk. "I'll come directly to the point. Mrs. Carter has informed me of her intention to retire next spring." The news startles you. Mrs. Carter, with her steady hands and encyclopedic knowledge of millinery techniques, has seemed as permanent a fixture of the shop as the wooden counter or the brass bell above the door. "I wasn't aware she was considering retirement," you manage. Few were. She has a sister in Brighton with health troubles and wishes to relocate there. Miss Beaumont sets aside her accounts book. Her departure will leave a significant gap in our operation. She is not merely our most experienced milliner, but also oversees much of our purchasing and manages our premium clientele. You nod, uncertain where this is leading. "I have been considering who might assume her responsibilities." Miss Beaumont's steady gaze fixes on you. "Your progress since joining us has been remarkable, Miss Harrington. You have an exceptional eye for design, a steady hand for execution, and have shown an increasing aptitude for business matters. Your heart beats faster as you begin to understand the direction of this conversation. Are you suggesting that I might take on Mrs. Carter's role?" Perhaps not all aspects immediately, but yes, with appropriate mentoring over the next 6 months, I believe you could assume most of her duties. The offer is more than you ever imagined possible when you first entered the shop as a nervous apprentice, to become the shop's senior milliner at 26, a position typically held by women a decade older with far more experience. "I'm honoured by your confidence," you say carefully, "and very interested in the opportunity." "Good," Miss Beaumont nods crisply. "There would, of course, be an adjustment to your wages, 5 shillings weekly to start, with the possibility of a percentage on premium orders after a trial period." 5 shillings weekly. The sum echoes in your mind. Nearly enough to rent a small room of your own, to build more substantial savings, to send regular packages to your mother and Sarah. The arrangement would begin in January, allowing you to work closely with Mrs. Carter during her final months. She has specifically recommended you for the position, which weighed significantly in my decision. "I'm grateful to Mrs. Carter for her confidence," you say, genuinely touched by the older woman's support, "and to you for this opportunity. I won't disappoint either of you." See that you don't. But there's a warmth in Miss Beaumont's typically stern expression. "That will be all, Miss Harrington. We'll discuss the specifics further as the time approaches." You leave the office in a daze, the magnitude of what's just happened sinking in gradually as you gather your things to depart. Not just a significant promotion, but an acknowledgement of your value, your skill, your potential. The letter in your pocket seems to burn with new significance as you step into the autumn evening. Mr. Patterson's words from his last correspondence echo in your mind. "I increasingly believe that our generation stands at a threshold. The old certainties are giving way, and with them, perhaps some of the old limitations as well." You read his new letter by candlelight that night after sharing your news with Emma and Miss Clark. Their genuine excitement, Emma's exuberant embrace, Miss Clark's wide-eyed admiration has left you buoyant, almost weightless with possibility. Mr. Patterson's words seem to continue the conversation, though he knows nothing yet of your promotion. "The case I mentioned previously has concluded with a satisfactory outcome," he writes. "The mill owner was required to install proper ventilation systems, and the workers received modest compensation for their illnesses. A small victory, perhaps, in the larger scheme, but meaningful for the families involved. It makes me consider how change happens, rarely in grand, sweeping gestures, but in these smaller adjustments, these individual assertions of right against wrong. Perhaps all progress is ultimately the cumulative effect of such moments." I find myself thinking of our conversations in London increasingly often. Your perspective on these matters was always refreshingly direct, unclouded by the theoretical abstractions that sometimes obscure practical realities. I miss that clarity of vision. I miss, in truth, many things about our exchanges. The letter continues with news of Manchester, observations on the changing autumn landscape, a mention of a meeting with your brother James, but it's the closing paragraph that captures your fullest attention. "I will be in London for 3 days next month on firm business. I wonder if you might consider meeting me for tea, or perhaps a visit to the new exhibition at the British Museum. I find myself most eager to resume our conversations in person if such an arrangement would be agreeable to you." The candlelight flickers as you reread these lines, trying to discern their precise meaning. Is this merely the continuation of your established friendship, or something more? The careful phrasing gives little away, properly circumspect, as all communication between unmarried men and women must be. Yet there's a warmth to the words, a personal quality that seems to extend beyond intellectual companionship. Or perhaps you're simply reading into it what part of you wishes to find. The question unsettles you more than you'd expected. For nearly 2 years, you've been building a life centered on independence and professional growth. The possibility of a different path, one that might include companionship of a more personal nature, hasn't figured in your calculations. Victorian museums were secretly incredible dating spots. Everyone thinks Victorians were uptight, but they figured out the loophole pretty quick. Educational institutions were considered totally proper places for unmarried people to hang out. So a museum date wasn't a date at all, just two people improving their minds while coincidentally standing very near each other. Clever, right? You set the letter aside, needing time to consider your response. Tomorrow you'll discuss it with Emma, whose practical wisdom has become increasingly valuable to you. For now, you simply allow yourself to appreciate that the choice exists at all, that your life contains options beyond mere survival. The following week brings another letter, this one from Sarah in Sussex. Her health has continued to improve in the country air, and her position at the village school has evolved from temporary assistance to permanent employment. The local vicar, impressed with her gentle manner and dedication, has recommended her for training at a proper teaching college in Brighton. Can you imagine, she writes, her joy evident even on paper. Me, with a teaching certificate, the fees are considerable, but the vicar believes a scholarship might be arranged. Given my experience with the village children, if successful, I could secure a position at a proper girls' school with decent wages and respectable quarters. You find yourself smiling as you read, genuinely pleased for Sarah's unexpected opportunity. None of you could have foreseen when she left London desperately ill that she would find not just health but a vocation in Sussex. The wheel turns, you think again. Paths diverge and converge in patterns we can't anticipate. Your own path takes an unexpected turn the following day when Mrs. Fairchild visits the shop, accompanied again by her niece, Miss Eleanor. They're seeking accessories for the winter social season, and Miss Beaumont assigns you to assist them directly, an acknowledgement of your imminent elevation in the shop's hierarchy. Miss Harrington, Mrs. Fairchild greets you warmly. Eleanor was most insistent we return to you for her winter requirements. She's been positively evangelical about the hat you designed for her last spring. You have an exceptional eye, Miss Eleanor says, studying you with that same direct gaze that caught your attention during their last visit. The blue hat with white trim has been much admired. Several of my friends have inquired about its creator. I'm gratified to hear it was satisfactory, you reply, professional pride warming your cheeks. What sort of piece did you have in mind for winter? As you consult with them on designs appropriate for the cold season, Miss Eleanor continues to observe you with particular interest. When her aunt becomes engrossed in examining trim options, she leans closer to speak privately. I understand you're to be promoted to senior milliner, she says, surprising you with her knowledge of the shop's internal matters. Mrs. Carter mentioned it to my aunt. That's correct, you confirm, wondering where this is leading. Have you considered establishing your own business eventually? With your talent and my aunt's connections, you could do quite well. The question startles you. Your own business? The idea has flickered at the edges of your thoughts occasionally, but always as a distant, improbable future. I'm honoured by your confidence, you say carefully, but such an enterprise requires capital I don't possess. Capital can be arranged, she says with a casual assurance that speaks of her privileged upbringing. Investors can be found for promising ventures. Before you can respond, Mrs. Fairchild returns and the conversation shifts back to hat designs, but Miss Eleanor's words linger in your mind long after they've departed with orders for 3 new pieces, your own business, your own shop, your own name above the door. The thought both thrills and terrifies. That evening you stop by Jane's new lodgings, a small but private room near her office at the suffrage committee. The space reflects her evolving identity. Political pamphlets stacked neatly beside books on economics and history, a small desk covered in correspondence, a window overlooking a busier street than your own. 5 shillings weekly, she exclaims when you share your news. And senior milliner by spring. Elizabeth, that's tremendous. It feels unreal, you admit, accepting the cup of tea she offers. 2 years ago, I was serving breakfast at a boarding house, and now you're a skilled professional with career prospects. Jane's smile is both proud and slightly smug, as if your success validates her broader political beliefs about women's capabilities. This is precisely why education and employment opportunities are so crucial. Women can excel when given the chance. I had something else to discuss, actually, you say, steering the conversation toward your other news. I've had a letter from Mr. Patterson. He's visiting London next month and wishes to meet. Jane's eyebrows rise. Ah, and how do you feel about that? Conflicted, you admit. We've maintained a correspondence for nearly a year now. His letters are thoughtful, engaging. He respects my opinions, shares his own without condescension, but you've built a life that doesn't depend on a man, Jane finishes for you, and you're wondering if pursuing a deeper connection might threaten that independence. Precisely. You're grateful for her immediate understanding. My career is advancing. I have friends, intellectual stimulation, a degree of security I never thought possible. What would I gain by complicating that with whatever this might become? What indeed? Jane sips her tea contemplatively, though I would point out that independence doesn't necessarily preclude companionship. One can maintain autonomy while sharing aspects of life with another, if that other person truly respects one's separate identity. Is that possible, do you think? Truly possible? Not just theoretically? You think of your mother's marriage, loving but entirely defined by traditional roles and expectations. I believe it must be, or we're working toward a rather lonely future. Jane's expression grows serious. The question is whether Mr. Patterson is the sort of man capable of such an arrangement. I don't know, you confess. His letters suggest progressive views. But letters can present an idealized version of oneself. Then perhaps you should meet him and discover the reality, Jane suggests practically. A visit to the British Museum hardly constitutes a lifelong commitment. You laugh, acknowledging the truth in her words. When did you become so moderate in your views? I expected you to warn me away from any entanglement with the oppressor class. Oh, I still believe the entire system of gender relations requires radical restructuring, Jane assures you with a grin. But I also believe in individual happiness within the constraints of our present reality. We can work to change the system while still finding moments of joy where possible. You leave Jane's lodgings with a lighter heart, her practical wisdom having cut through your tangled thoughts. You'll meet Mr. Patterson when he visits, not with any predetermined outcome in mind, but simply to continue a connection that has brought value to your life. As autumn deepens toward winter, your days fall into a new pattern. Mornings and early afternoons are devoted to regular shop work, designing, constructing, assisting customers. But late afternoons now include special instruction from Mrs. Carter, who seems determined to transfer her lifetime of millinery knowledge to you before her retirement. The secret to a truly exceptional hat, she tells you one evening as you work together after hours, is understanding that it's never just an accessory. It's architecture, sculpture, and fashion combined. It must balance on the head, frame the face, and express something about its wearer. Her gnarled fingers guide yours through particularly challenging techniques, the perfect blocking of complex shapes, the invisible securing of delicate trims, the subtle manipulations that transform flat fabric into dimensional art. You have the technical skill, she observes, watching you complete a difficult pleating, and the eye for design. What you're still developing is the business acumen, knowing what will sell, what you can charge, how to manage the 1,000 invisible details that keep a shop profitable. I'm grateful for your guidance, you tell her sincerely. I know there are milliners who guard their techniques jealously. She snorts softly. What good is knowledge hoarded? I've no daughters to pass my skills to. Better they live on in your hands than die with me. There's something poignant in her matter-of-fact statement. Mrs. Carter represents a different type of spinster, an older generation who perhaps had fewer choices, fewer opportunities for community beyond the traditional family structure. Yet she's created a legacy nonetheless, through her art and her willingness to transmit it. I'll do my best to honour what you've taught me, you promise. She nods, apparently satisfied. Now show me again how you're constructing the base for Mrs. Fairchild's niece's winter hat. The angle seems slightly off. The weeks pass in this dual rhythm, regular work and special training, your skills expanding in both technical and business directions. Letters arrive regularly, from Sarah in Sussex, from James in Manchester, and from Mr. Patterson confirming the dates of his London visit. You reply to the latter with carefully composed acceptance of his invitation to the British Museum, suggesting a time and proposing to meet directly there, a public location that maintains propriety while avoiding the need for a chaperone. His response comes quickly, expressing pleasure at your acceptance and suggesting an additional outing to hear a lecture at the Royal Society on recent scientific discoveries. The expanded invitation further blurs the line between intellectual companionship and potential courtship, leaving you both nervous and intrigued as the date approaches. November brings sharp frosts and early darkness. London wraps itself in fog and coal smoke, the gas lamps creating halos in the thick air as you make your way home each evening. Your breath clouds before you, and your fingers, despite their working calluses, ache with cold by the time you reach your lodgings. But there's warmth within, not just from the small fire Emma maintains, but from the sense of community that has grown among the house's residents. Miss Clark has blossomed from nervous country girl to confident apprentice, often bringing home amusing tales of customer foibles. Emma's steady presence provides continuity, her practical nature balancing your increasingly theoretical discussions with Jane when she visits. One unusually bitter evening, as you all huddle near the fire, Emma makes an announcement. I've had a letter from my cousin in Liverpool. She's married a shopkeeper there, and they're expecting their first child in the spring. She's invited me to join them, to help with the baby and the shop. The news catches you by surprise. Emma has been your constant companion since those first terrifying days of independence. The thought of her departure creates an unexpected hollow in your chest. Will you go? Miss Clark asks. Emma nods. I think so. The shop sells ladies' accessories, gloves, scarves, that sort of thing. My cousin says I could advance to managing it eventually as she focuses on motherhood. That's a wonderful opportunity, you say, genuinely happy for her, despite your sadness at the prospect of her leaving, though we'll miss you terribly. It won't be until February, she assures you. And I'll write, of course, but I'm nearly 28 now. This might be my best chance for something different. Something different. The phrase echoes your own thoughts of late. Your life has stabilized into something respectable, comfortable even, despite its limitations. Yet there remains a restlessness, a sense of unrealized possibility. Miss Eleanor's words return to you. Have you considered establishing your own business? The idea no longer seems as impossibly distant as it once did. With your promotion to senior milliner, with Mrs. Carter's intensive training, with connections to customers like Mrs. Fairchild and her circle, perhaps it's not entirely beyond reach. That night you draft a careful letter to Miss Eleanor, inquiring hypothetically, of course, about the nature of the investment arrangements she hinted at. It's merely an exploration, you tell yourself. Information gathering, no commitment. Yet, as you seal the envelope, you feel a small thrill of possibility. Your life as a Victorian spinster continues to evolve in ways you never imagined when you first left the boarding house. Not just survival, but growth. Not just independence, but potential prosperity. Outside your window, London sleeps beneath its blanket of fog, a city of both crushing limitation and boundless opportunity, and somewhere within it your future takes shape, stitch by careful stitch, choice by deliberate choice. The British Museum looms before you, its grand columns stark against the December sky. You hesitate at the bottom of the steps, adjusting your gloves, your mother's gift, now slightly worn but still respectable. Your best dress, carefully refreshed with new trim and a cleaned collar, feels simultaneously too formal and not fine enough for this meeting that hovers in the uncertain territory between friendship and something more. You're early, deliberately so, to give yourself time to settle your nerves. The museum's great hall swallows visitors in its cavernous space, making even the well-dressed crowd seem small and temporary against the ancient artifacts surrounding them. Miss Harrington. The voice behind you is familiar from countless conversations in London parks and tea shops, yet somehow different after months of existing only as written words. You turn to find Mr. Patterson removing his hat, a smile warming his serious face. "You came?" he says, as if there had been real doubt. "I said I would," you reply, suddenly shy despite the months of correspondence between you. He looks much the same, tall, somewhat scholarly in appearance, with the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind frequently wanders to complex legal questions. Yet there's a new confidence in his bearing, perhaps the result of his success in Manchester. "Shall we?" He gestures toward the exhibition halls. "I believe the new Egyptian acquisitions are this way." The awkwardness of the first moments dissolves as you move through the galleries, the familiar rhythm of your conversations returning. He describes his work in Manchester, the mill owner's resistance to safety regulations, the slow progress of legal remedies, the satisfaction of occasional victories. You share updates on the millinery shop, your promotion, Mrs. Carter's mentorship. The stone gods and ancient treasures around you become background to this exchange of lives lived separately but still somehow connected. "I see my brother regularly," he mentions as you pause before a glass case of delicate golden jewellery. He speaks highly of you, says you've made quite an impression at the newspaper where he works. You laugh, startled. "I've never even met your brother." "No, but he knows you're the Miss Harrington I mention in my letters. Mr. Patterson studies the ancient necklace rather than meeting your eyes. I may speak of you, not infrequently." The admission hangs between you, significant but not yet demanding response. You move to the next display, giving yourself time to consider its implications. "London seems unchanged," he observes, allowing the moment to pass. "Though I find I see it differently now. Manchester has shifted my perspective." "In what way?" you ask, genuinely curious. The industrial north is less concerned with appearances, more direct in its conflicts. Class distinctions exist, certainly, but they're more openly acknowledged and contested. He gestures vaguely at the well-dressed museum patrons around you. "London maintains its fictions more carefully." You think of Miss Beaumont's shop, with its careful hierarchies and unspoken rules, its deference to wealthy customers alongside the quiet pride in craftsmanship. Perhaps, though I've found there are spaces where those fictions matter less, where skill and work create their own kind of respect. Your millinery shop, and other places, the women's meetings Jane attends, even our shared lodgings where background matters less than contribution. He nods thoughtfully. That's what I find so compelling about your letters. You observe the world as it is while imagining what it might become. The compliment warms you unexpectedly. After 2 hours that pass too quickly, you find yourselves in the museum's tea room, continuing the conversation over steaming cups and small cakes, an extravagance he insists upon. I've been corresponding with a colleague about partnership opportunities, he tells you, stirring his tea. There's a small but respectable firm in London specialising in labour disputes and women's legal matters, property rights, employment contracts, that sort of thing. They've expressed interest in my experience with the Manchester cases. You understand immediately. You're considering returning to London. I am. His eyes meet yours directly. There would be practical advantages. The London courts handle precedent-setting cases. The firm has connections to reform-minded MPs. A pause. And there are personal considerations as well. The implication is clear, though still carefully phrased. You look down at your tea, organising your thoughts. Mr. Patterson. James, he interrupts gently. After all this time, perhaps we might use our given names, at least in appropriate settings. The request represents a small but significant shift in your relationship, a move toward greater intimacy but still within the bounds of propriety. James, you concede, finding the name strange on your tongue after so many months of formal address. I value our friendship immensely. Your letters have been a source of intellectual stimulation and personal connection during a period of significant change in my life, as yours have been for me. His expression is earnest, attentive. But my circumstances remain complicated. I'm establishing myself professionally. I have responsibilities to others, my mother, my friends. Any deepening of our acquaintance would need to accommodate those realities. He nods, unsurprised by your caution. I would expect nothing less. I admire your independence, Elizabeth. I have no wish to diminish it. The use of your given name sends an unexpected shiver through you. How odd that such a small thing, the simple sound of your name in his voice, should affect you so strongly. Then we understand each other, you say, fighting to keep your voice steady. I believe we do. His smile returns. Now, will you join me for the lecture at the Royal Society tomorrow? The speaker is addressing recent astronomical discoveries that challenge our understanding of the universe's age. The shift to safer intellectual territory comes as a relief. I would enjoy that very much. As you part outside the museum, he takes your hand briefly, a liberty but a small one. Until tomorrow, Elizabeth. Until tomorrow, James. You walk home through the winter dusk, London's gas lamps creating pools of light in the gathering darkness. Your mind replays the conversation, examining it from all angles like a complex hat design. Not quite a declaration, not merely friendship, a possibility carefully presented for your consideration. The most surprising part is your own reaction, not the instinctive retreat you might have expected, but a cautious openness to the possibility he represents. Not a surrender of independence, but perhaps a different kind of partnership than the traditional marriage your mother still hopes for. At your lodgings, you find a letter waiting, the crisp stationery and precise handwriting immediately identifying it as from Miss Eleanor Fairchild. You open it with fingers still cold from your walk, reading by the room's single gas lamp. Dear Miss Harrington, she writes, I was most pleased to receive your inquiry regarding potential business arrangements. I believe a conversation on the matter would be more productive than correspondence. Might you be available to take tea at my aunt's home on Thursday next? Mrs. Fairchild is eager to discuss certain ideas we have been considering regarding the millinery trade in London. The letter continues with practical details, address, time, assurances of discretion. You read it twice, noting its careful phrasing. This is not merely social courtesy. There is genuine business intent behind the invitation. Two paths potentially opening before you, one personal, one professional, both unexpected, both representing departures from what you had imagined for yourself as a Victorian spinster making your way alone. The following day brings your regular lessons with Mrs. Carter, who notices your slight distraction as you practice a particularly demanding trim technique. Your mind is elsewhere today, Miss Harrington, she observes, not unkindly. The silk is feeling your inattention. You flush, embarrassed at being caught daydreaming like an apprentice. I apologize, Mrs. Carter. I have some decisions to consider. She studies you with shrewd eyes that have observed decades of women's lives. Business or personal? Both, actually, you admit, resuming your work with renewed focus. Potentially significant ones. She nods, unsurprised. You're at that age, young enough for change, established enough to have choices. A fortunate position, if sometimes an uncertain one. Did you face similar crossroads, you ask, curious about this woman who has shared her professional knowledge but little of her personal history? A slight smile touches her lips. Several, though with fewer options than you have now. Times have changed, even in my lifetime. May I ask what guided your decisions? She considers the question as she adjusts a wire frame. I chose independence when it seemed most believed women incapable of it. It wasn't always easy, but I never regretted maintaining control of my own life. She passes you a length of ribbon. That said, independence doesn't necessarily mean solitude. There are many ways to build a life, Miss Harrington. The advice, though general, feels like permission to consider possibilities beyond the either-or of traditional marriage versus complete independence. That evening brings the Royal Society lecture, a fascinating discourse on celestial observations that challenges biblical timelines of creation. The content itself is stimulating, but equally engaging is the experience of sharing it with someone who finds the same ideas compelling. The implications are staggering, James comments as you walk afterward, the winter night clear enough to show a few stars despite London's ever-present smoke. If the universe is millions of years old rather than thousands, every assumption built on the shorter time frame must be reconsidered. Including assumptions about humanity's place within it, you add, thinking of the broader implications, about our purpose and meaning. Exactly. His glance is appreciative. Most people focus only on the theological controversy, but the philosophical questions are equally profound. The conversation continues through a light supper at a modest but respectable establishment near the Society's halls. You're conscious of the unusual nature of the outing, not quite proper for unmarried people without a chaperone, yet not entirely scandalous given its educational nature and the public setting. London's social rules have always contained these grey areas, these spaces where propriety bends without quite breaking, and increasingly women like you, educated, independent, neither girl nor married matron, occupy these ambiguous territories. I should escort you home, James says as the evening grows late, though I confess I'm reluctant to end our conversation. As am I, you admit. But I have an early morning at the shop tomorrow. The cab ride to your lodgings passes too quickly. At your door he takes your hand again, holding it a moment longer than strictly necessary. I return to Manchester the day after tomorrow, he says, but I hope to have news about the London position within a month. May I continue to write to you? I would be disappointed if you didn't, you reply honestly. And if circumstances allow my return to London. You meet his gaze directly. Then we might continue these conversations in person and see where they lead. It's neither promise nor rejection, simply acknowledgement of possibility. He seems to understand, nodding before releasing your hand. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, James. Inside, Emma waits up, eager for details about your evening. You share the basics, the lecture content, the dinner conversation, but keep the more personal aspects private, still processing them yourself. He seems very intellectual, Emma observes, helping you unfasten your dress. Is that what appeals to you about him? You consider the question as you change into your nightclothes. Partly. He takes ideas seriously, including mine, but there's more to it. He's kind, observant. He sees the world clearly, but isn't hardened by its injustices. Emma smiles knowingly. Sounds like more than just an intellectual connection. You can't deny it, though you're not ready to define exactly what that more might be. Perhaps, but my life is complicated enough at present without adding further complications. Life is complications, Emma says with unexpected wisdom. The question is which ones are worth embracing. Thursday brings your appointment with Miss Eleanor and Mrs. Fairchild. You wear your best dress again, this time with the addition of a hat you designed yourself. Subtle, but demonstrating both technical skill and aesthetic judgment. If this is truly a business meeting, you want to display your qualifications literally from head to toe. The Fairchild residence in Belgravia speaks of old money and established position, a world removed from your lodgings on Greystone Lane. The butler who admits you eyes your modest attire with practiced neutrality before leading you to a sunlit drawing room where the two women await. Miss Harrington, Mrs. Fairchild greets you warmly. How delightful to see you outside the shop setting. Do sit down. Eleanor has been positively bursting to discuss her ideas with you. Tea is served, a formal affair with delicate cups and precisely cut sandwiches. You're grateful for your years of observing wealthy customers at the shop, which have taught you the subtle etiquette of these situations. Still, you're acutely aware of being an outsider in this world of inherited privilege and automatic authority. Once the servants withdraw, Miss Eleanor leans forward, her manner shifting from social politeness to business focus with surprising speed. I'll come directly to the point, Miss Harrington. My aunt and I, along with several other women of our acquaintance, have been discussing the establishment of a new type of millinery enterprise in London, one catering specifically to progressive women who desire fashion that accommodates a more active lifestyle. You listen with growing interest as she outlines the concept, a shop specializing in hats and accessories designed for women engaged in activities traditionally considered masculine, riding, tennis, even cycling, which has become increasingly popular despite ongoing debate about its propriety for ladies. The current offerings are either excessively masculine, sacrificing all beauty for function, or remain impractically ornamental, Miss Eleanor explains. We believe there's a market for designs that bridge this divide, stylish yet practical, feminine without being restrictive. An intriguing concept, you acknowledge. But how does this concern me specifically? Mrs. Fairchild sets down her teacup. We need a milliner with both technical expertise and creative vision to execute the designs, someone who understands both fashion and the practical needs of modern women. Someone like you, Miss Eleanor adds directly. The implication becomes clear as they continue. They're proposing to finance the establishment of a new shop, providing the capital, the connections, and the initial clientele, with you as the creative and operational director. You would have considerable autonomy in the designs and day-to-day management, Mrs. Fairchild explains, while we would maintain ownership interests proportionate to our investments. Think of it as a partnership, Miss Eleanor suggests, your skill and labour combined with our capital and connections. The proposal is breathtaking in its scope and unexpectedness. Your own shop, or something very close to it, without the years of saving and struggling you had assumed would be necessary. An opportunity to create designs that reflect your own aesthetic vision rather than always deferring to established conventions. This is most unexpected, you manage, mind racing with questions and possibilities. I would need to understand the specific terms, the financial arrangements, the division of authority, the expectations regarding my time and contribution. Of course, Miss Eleanor nods approvingly at your businesslike response. We've prepared a preliminary outline of terms for your review. She hands you several pages of neatly written notes, a surprisingly thorough business proposal that addresses many of the questions already forming in your mind. The level of detail suggests this is not a whim, but a carefully considered venture. We don't expect an immediate answer, Mrs. Fairchild assures you. Such an important decision requires proper consideration, but we would appreciate your thoughts within the month, as we hope to establish the business in the spring. As you leave the Fairchild residence, your head spins with the morning's revelations. The proposal represents everything you've secretly dreamed of but never quite believed possible. Creative control, professional advancement, financial improvement, all without decades of incremental progress. Yet questions nag at you. Why you? Why now? What do these wealthy women truly expect from this arrangement? And most pressingly, how would this affect your imminent promotion at Beaumont Millinery, your commitment to Mrs. Carter's training, your obligations to Miss Beaumont, who has invested in your development? The winter sun offers little warmth as you make your way back toward more familiar parts of London. Your life, which seemed relatively settled just weeks ago, now presents multiple diverging paths, each with its own promises and uncertainties. That evening you write 3 letters, one to Sarah in Sussex, sharing your news and seeking her practical perspective, one to James in Manchester, describing the business proposal in careful terms that present it as an interesting professional development rather than a life-altering opportunity, and one to your mother, mentioning only your promotion at the shop, knowing she would find the other possibilities either worrying or incomprehensible. The act of writing helps clarify your thoughts. By articulating the situation to others, you begin to understand your own inclinations more clearly. The following weeks bring responses. Sarah's enthusiastic endorsement of the business opportunity. Think of the freedom it would give you. James's thoughtful analysis of the legal and financial considerations. The terms seem fair, though I would suggest clarification on several points. And your mother's pride in your promotion mixed with gentle inquiries about any suitable young men you might have met at church. Christmas approaches, bringing a brief respite from work as the shop closes for 2 days. You use the rare free time to visit your mother, bringing small gifts purchased with your improved wages, a warm shawl, a tin of special tea, a book of devotional poetry she had admired in a shop window. "You're looking well," she tells you, studying your face with a mother's attentiveness. "There's a confidence about you that's new." "Is there?" You smile, helping her arrange the simple Christmas meal on her small table. Perhaps it's just satisfaction with my work. Perhaps, but her eyes suggest she senses more than you've revealed. You know I only want your happiness, Elizabeth, whatever form that takes. The words surprise you, an unexpected flexibility from a woman who has always held traditional views on a daughter's proper path, even if it's not the form you once hoped for. She sighs, patting your hand. I've lived long enough to see that there are many ways to build a worthy life. Your father and I had a good marriage, but it wasn't the only possible happiness. She glances around her modest room, clean but spare, a widow's reduced circumstances. And marriage brings no guarantees of security, as my situation proves. This glimpse of your mother as a woman with her own reflections and reconsiderations, not merely a voice of conventional expectations, feels like a gift more precious than any you brought in your basket. You return to your lodgings that evening to find Emma and Miss Clark decorating the small room with holly branches and paper chains, their faces alight with the simple pleasure of making their humble space festive. Jane's coming tomorrow with mince pies, Emma announces, and I've managed to find a small goose we can roast, a proper Christmas dinner. The holiday passes in this spirit of modest celebration and genuine warmth. Jane brings not only the promised pies, but also news from her suffrage work. A petition gaining unexpected support from several MPs, a series of letters published in respectable newspapers advancing the cause. Things are shifting, she tells you all, eyes bright with conviction, slowly, incrementally, but undeniably. 10 years ago, these ideas were considered scandalous. Now they're merely controversial. Progress. You think of Mrs. Carter's words about choosing independence when few believed women capable of it, of Miss Eleanor's vision for fashion that accommodates women's expanding activities and roles, of your own journey from invisibility to skilled professional with choices before you. Progress indeed, not revolution. The world remains structured around male authority and female dependence in 1,000 ways large and small, but change is happening, creating cracks in those structures, openings where different kinds of lives might take root and grow. As the new year dawns, 1864, full of unknowns, you find yourself standing at one of those openings, peering through to possibilities your mother's generation could scarcely have imagined. Not just survival as a spinster, but potential prosperity. Not just acceptance of singlehood as misfortune, but embracing it as opportunity. The wheel turns, and with each rotation, the landscape changes, revealing new horizons for those with the courage to seek them. Spring arrives in London with its particular urban magic, sooty trees suddenly bursting with green tiny flowers pushing through cracks in pavement, the quality of light changing even through the city's perpetual haze. The season of renewal brings decisions ripening like fruit after months of careful tending. You stand before the newly painted shop front, watching as the sign painter adds the final touches to the elegant script above the door, Harrington and Fairchild Millinery. Your shop, or rather yours in partnership with Miss Eleanor, whose business acumen has proven as sharp as her progressive ideas. After weeks of negotiation, consultation with James, whose legal expertise proved invaluable, and careful consideration of your various paths, you chose this one. Entrepreneurship with the security of financial backing. The decision wasn't made lightly. Miss Beaumont received your resignation with tight-lipped disappointment but grudging understanding. I cannot offer you ownership, Miss Harrington, she acknowledged when you explained the opportunity. Only advancement within established parameters. Mrs. Carter, surprisingly, offered her blessing. "I've taught you everything I know," she said, her practical hand steady on yours. "Now use it to build something of your own." The shop is smaller than Beaumont's, but ideally located on a rising street frequented by the sort of progressive, educated women who might appreciate hats designed for both beauty and function. The interior gleams with fresh paint and cleverly arranged mirrors that make the space feel larger than it is. Miss Clark, no, Annie, as you now call her outside business hours, has joined you in this venture, leaving her apprenticeship to become your assistant. Her northern pragmatism complements your creative vision, and her gratitude for the opportunity manifests in tireless work as opening day approaches. "The display forms have arrived," she tells you, emerging from the back room. "Shall I arrange them in the window?" "Yes, let's start with the riding hats and the tennis designs," you decide. "The cycling models can wait until next week." As Annie arranges the wooden head forms, you review the account books one more time. The investment from the Fairchild Circle covers the initial expenses, with a reasonable cushion for the inevitable lean months of establishing a new business. Your own modest savings, built during your time at Beaumont's, provide personal security if the venture falters. It's a risk, certainly, but a calculated one based on solid planning and genuine market research among the network of progressive women Mrs. Fairchild and Miss Eleanor have cultivated. Already you have orders for the opening, commissions for designs that would never have found a place at Beaumont's traditional shop. A tapping at the window interrupts your calculations. You look up to see James standing outside, smiling and gesturing toward the new sign with obvious pride. Your heart lifts at the sight of him, still a relatively new reaction that catches you by surprise each time. His return to London 2 months ago marked another turning point in your evolving life. The position with the legal firm specializing in labor and women's issues provided the professional fulfillment he sought, while allowing your relationship to develop through regular meetings, museum visits, lectures, shared meals, conversations that range from philosophical depths to practical concerns to personal revelations. You open the door, still officially closed until tomorrow's grand opening. "What do you think?" you ask, gesturing to the nearly complete shop. "It's magnificent," he says, stepping inside and surveying the space with genuine admiration. "Truly, Elizabeth, you've created something remarkable here." "With considerable help," you acknowledge, thinking of Miss Eleanor's capital, Mrs. Fairchild's connections, Annie's tireless assistance, and indeed James's own legal guidance through the maze of partnership agreements and lease contracts. "Help you've earned through your talent and determination," he counters, a familiar point of loving contention between you. James consistently attributes your success to personal merit, while you remain acutely aware of the network of support that makes independence possible for women like you. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between individual capability, finding fertile ground in community and connection. "Are we still meeting for dinner?" he asks, checking his pocket watch. "I've made reservations at Richardson's for 7. "Yes, though I'll need to go home and change first." You glance down at your practical work dress, smudged with dust from unpacking merchandise. This hardly suits a celebratory dinner. "I'll escort you home and return at 6:30, he offers, "unless you'd prefer I wait." The question contains multiple layers of meaning in Victorian London, where an unmarried man waiting in a spinster's lodgings occupies ambiguous moral territory. Your relationship with James has evolved into something both deeply meaningful and deliberately undefined, neither conventional courtship nor mere friendship, but a connection built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I think it best if you return later, you decide, maintaining the proprieties that still matter despite your progressive inclinations. He nods, understanding the boundaries you both carefully navigate. Until this evening, then. After he leaves, you and Annie complete the final preparations for tomorrow's opening. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you lock up the shop, your shop, and walk toward home, still the same modest lodgings on Greystone Lane despite your improved circumstances. Emma departed for Liverpool last month, leaving you the senior resident in the house. Miss Peterson, a quiet typist from Yorkshire, has taken her place, slotting neatly into the household rhythms. The arrangement continues to provide both economy and community practical benefits that outweigh the social prestige of more private accommodations you could now potentially afford. You change for dinner, selecting a dress that reflects your new status. Not extravagant, but well-made and fashionable in a subtle way. The woman in the mirror still startles you sometimes. Confident, established, a far cry from the desperate boarding house assistant of 2 years ago. At Richardson's, a modestly elegant establishment that caters to the professional middle class, James has secured a quiet table near the window. The spring evening stretches long with soft light, allowing you to observe the passing parade of London life as you eat. "To new beginnings," James offers, raising his glass in a toast. "New beginnings," you echo, touching your glass to his. The conversation flows easily between practical matters, final preparations for tomorrow's opening, his recent case representing female textile workers seeking fair compensation, and more personal reflections. "I had a letter from Sarah yesterday," you tell him as you finish your meal. The teaching college has offered her a permanent position upon completion of her certificate. She'll be instructing future governesses in natural sciences. "Remarkable," James says, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "From shop girl to professor in 2 years, though I'm hardly surprised given the company she keeps." His eyes twinkle with the compliment. "The world is changing," you observe, watching a woman cycle past the restaurant window. A sight that would have scandalized society a decade earlier, but now merely raises eyebrows. Slowly, unevenly, but changing nonetheless. "Indeed," he hesitates, then adds, "which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss with you." Your pulse quickens at his serious tone. Over the past months, your relationship has existed in a comfortable state of undefined potential. Close, affectionate, intellectually stimulating, but without formal declarations or commitments. "I've been offered a position as junior partner," he continues, "earlier than expected, largely due to the success of the textile workers case." James, that's wonderful. Your pleasure for him is genuine and uncomplicated. You've certainly earned the recognition. "Thank you." He smiles briefly, then grows serious again. "The position comes with improved income and status, as you might expect, which makes certain things more feasible. The implication hangs between you. Improved income means increased ability to support a household, which traditionally means marriage." "Elizabeth," he says, his voice softening as he reaches across the table to take your hand, "I hope you know how deeply I admire you, your intelligence, your determination, your fundamental integrity." Your throat tightens with emotion, but you remain silent, allowing him to continue. "I've given considerable thought to what I'm about to propose because I understand the value you place on your independence. The last thing I wish is to diminish the remarkable life you've built. This consideration, this awareness of what truly matters to you, moves you more than any conventional romantic declaration might have. I wonder if you would consider a partnership of a different sort than the one you've just established with Miss Fairchild," he says carefully. A marriage based not on traditional roles and expectations, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that your work and independence remain essential aspects of who you are. The proposal, for all its modern sensibility, still catches your breath, not because it's unexpected exactly, but because it represents another crossroads, another significant choice with far-reaching implications. I don't offer the conventional arrangement where you would become merely an extension of my household and identity, James continues, his earnestness touching. I'm suggesting something more akin to your business partnership, two independent people choosing to build something together while maintaining their separate strengths and pursuits. A progressive marriage, you murmur, turning the concept over in your mind. Precisely. His eyes hold yours steadily. I love you, Elizabeth, but I love who you are, not some diminished version that would fit more neatly into traditional expectations. The declaration, finally spoken plainly, creates a warm expansion in your chest. You've known his feelings, as he has surely sensed yours, but hearing the words alters something fundamental between you. I don't expect an immediate answer, he adds. Such an important decision deserves proper consideration. You squeeze his hand, grateful for this understanding. I need time to think, yes, but James, I do love you too. That much I can say with certainty. The relief and joy that transforms his face is its own kind of answer, though not the final one. You both recognize that what you're considering is more complex than a traditional engagement. It's an attempt to create something new within the constraints of Victorian society, a relationship that honors both connection and independence. The spring evening wraps around you both as you walk back to your lodgings, discussing practicalities and possibilities with the same blend of idealism and clear-eyed assessment that characterizes all your conversations. No definitive decision is reached, but a path forward begins to materialize, a potential future neither of you could have imagined when you first met at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Sleep comes slowly that night, your mind too full of tomorrow's shop opening and James's proposal. When you finally drift off, your dreams are a kaleidoscope of hats and wedding rings, account books and household ledgers, all swirling together in patterns that somehow make perfect sense within the logic of sleep. Morning arrives with weak sunshine and the flutter of nervous excitement in your stomach. Opening day, the culmination of weeks of preparation, months of planning, and years of developing the skills that make it possible. You dress with special care, selecting a gown that projects both professionalism and fashion awareness. On your head, naturally, is one of your own designs, a modestly elegant hat that demonstrates your philosophy of combining beauty with practicality. At the shop, Annie has already arrived, arranging fresh flowers in small vases throughout the space. Mrs. Fairchild and Miss Eleanor appear shortly after, bringing a journalist from the Ladies' Monthly Review who wishes to write about the innovative concept behind the business. A millinery specifically designed for the modern woman's active lifestyle, the journalist notes, scribbling in her notebook as you explain the philosophy behind your designs, addressing a genuine need in the market. Most interesting. By 10 o'clock, when you officially open the doors, a small crowd has gathered, friends, supporters, and curious potential customers drawn by the discreet announcements placed in selected publications and shared through Mrs. Fairchild's extensive social network. The day passes in a blur of introductions, explanations, demonstrations, and sales. Your riding hats prove especially popular, their secure fitting and elegant profiles drawing admiration from several women who belong to the newly formed Ladies' Equestrian Society. By closing time, you've sold 8 hats, taken orders for 12 more, and established connections with potential customers who promise to return with friends. A successful beginning by any measure, though you know the true test will come in the weeks and months ahead as novelty fades and the business must sustain itself on quality and reputation. As you lock the shop door, weary but deeply satisfied, you find James waiting across the street, his expression a mixture of pride and amusement. "Successful day?" he asks, falling into step beside you. "Very," you confirm, too tired for false modesty. "We've already recouped a small portion of the initial investment, and the response to the designs was overwhelmingly positive." "I'm not surprised," he says, offering his arm as you navigate a particularly muddy crossing. "You've identified a genuine need and addressed it beautifully, the fundamental formula for business success." His simple faith in your abilities warms you as you walk toward a small restaurant where you've agreed to have a quiet dinner, a more subdued celebration than the previous night, but no less meaningful. Over soup and bread, you find yourself studying him with new attention. The intelligent eyes, the mouth that smiles so readily at your observations, the hands that gesticulate when he's explaining a complex legal concept. This man who offers partnership rather than ownership, respect rather than protection. "I've been thinking about your proposal," you say when there's a natural pause in the conversation. He sets down his spoon, giving you his full attention. "And I would need to maintain my business," you begin, having carefully considered your essential conditions, not merely as a pastime or supplementary income, but as a genuine professional pursuit. "Of course," he agrees immediately. "I would expect nothing less. And our household, if we were to establish one, would need to be organized with different assumptions than most. I'm not suited to be primarily a household manager. We would need domestic help, regardless of whether children eventually enter the picture." He nods, unsurprised by this practical consideration. "My new income would make that feasible, and I'm hardly expecting you to transform into a traditional wife, Elizabeth. That would be rather like admiring a hawk for its grace in flight, then clipping its wings and keeping it in a parlour cage." The metaphor startles a laugh from you. "Am I so fierce?" "Not fierce," he corrects thoughtfully. "Independent, meant for open sky." Something settles in your chest at his words, the final resolution of a question you've been weighing since his proposal. This man sees you truly, values what others might consider inconvenient or inappropriate in a wife, and offers partnership that would expand rather than contract your world. "Yes," you say simply. He blinks, momentarily confused by the abrupt response. "Yes to your proposal, to marriage on the terms we've discussed." You smile at his expression of dawning joy. "Though I'll need several months to establish the business properly before taking on additional life changes. I would wait years, if necessary," he assures you, reaching across the table to take your hand. "Though I admit I'm selfishly pleased it won't be quite so long." The future unfolds before you like a map with multiple promising routes, your business growing and evolving to serve the changing needs of women like yourself, your relationship with James, a new model of marriage based on mutual respect and shared purpose, your connections to friends scattered across England, each building her own version of a meaningful life. None of it's certain, all of it requiring continued effort and adaptation, but so much more than you could have imagined when you first earned the title of Spinster at 25. Later, as you prepare for bed in your modest room at Greystone Lane, a room you'll eventually leave for a shared home with James, though you've already discussed maintaining a separate workspace for your design work, you reflect on the journey that brought you here. From the boarding house to Beaumont's shop, from desperate independence to chosen partnership, from social invisibility to professional recognition, each step building on the last, each decision opening new possibilities rather than closing them. You think of Sarah in Sussex finding her vocation in education, of Jane and her political work with the suffrage movement, of Emma in Liverpool creating her own place within a family business. Different paths, all valid, all representing expanded horizons for women once dismissed as surplus or redundant. Outside your window, London settles into its nighttime rhythms, carriages on cobblestones, distant factory whistles, the murmur of countless lives intersecting in the vast metropolis. Among them, thousands of women like you are writing new stories, finding new ways to exist with dignity and purpose in a world still shaped primarily by and for men. The wheel turns. And with each rotation, the possibilities expand, the definitions soften, the narratives evolve. You are still technically a spinster, unmarried at 27, but the word has lost its power to define or constrain you. It's merely a legal designation, not an identity or a limitation. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, the second day of business, decisions about designs and materials, negotiations with suppliers, all the mundane details that constitute a working life. Next month will bring further discussions with James about your future together, practical arrangements balanced with genuine affection. But tonight, in this moment between wakefulness and dreams, you simply acknowledge how far you've come. Not just survival, but flourishing. Not just independence, but meaningful connection. Not just work, but purpose. The story of Victorian spinsters isn't just about what was lost or denied, the traditional paths of marriage and motherhood that society deemed essential for female fulfillment. It's equally about what was found and created, new forms of community, new avenues for contribution, new definitions of womanhood itself. Your eyes grow heavy as sleep approaches, your body relaxing into the familiar comfort of your narrow bed. One last thought drifts through your mind before consciousness fades. The women who came before you, making your path possible through their quiet persistence. And the women who will come after, building on what your generation is creating. The wheel turns, and with each rotation, possibility expands. Sleep now, knowing you've found your place in that eternal cycle of change. Not a failure or a leftover, but a pioneer, a Victorian spinster, redefining what those words can mean.